We're live. Mayor Martinez-Rubin, I think we're live.
Super, wonderful. Thank you very much for confirming that. So welcome everyone, good morning. It is Saturday, October 9th, 2021. I am calling to order the special workshop of the Pinole City Council. And would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance in honor of the U.S. military troops. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Madam City Clerk, roll call, please.
Mayor Martinez-Rubin.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Salimi. Mayor Pro Tem Salimi.
There you go.
I'm looking to confirm that Mayor Pro Tem Salimi is with us.
Good evening, good morning. Yes, I'm here. Sorry, my computer crashed, so I'm joining with my cell phone right now. You will not have videos. You would have to wait a little bit, but I'll be able to join you via videos in a few minutes. But I'm here.
Thank you. Councilmember Tave.
Here.
Councilmember Murphy.
Here.
Councilmember Toms.
Here.
Manager Murray.
Here.
City Attorney Kasher.
Here.
Assistant City Manager De La Rosa.
He will be absent.
Is noting that for the record. Thank you. Mayor and Council, the agenda was posted on Wednesday, October 6th at 11 a.m. with all legally required notices. Written comments were received by members of the public and were posted to the agenda page of the city's website and distributed to City Council and staff in advance of the meeting. Does the council have any conflicts to report on our agenda item today? Seeing none, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. So we get to the point of the agenda where it is a public comment for citizens to be heard. You can join us via the Zoom webinar ID number 893-3500-0272 appearing on your screen, and or by phone 669-900-6833. When I open the period, and it will be shortly, and if you wish to speak, use the raise hand option if you're joining us by Zoom, or press *9 to alert staff if you'd like to comment, and then press *6 to unmute once you're called on. So at this time, there will be a 3-minute limit, and it is subject to modification. Individuals may not share or offer time to another speaker, and these will be comments on items not on today's agenda. Pursuant to modification as needed, pursuant to provisions of the Brown Act, no action may be taken on a matter unless it is listed on the agenda or unless certain emergency or special circumstances exist. The City Council may direct staff to investigate and or schedule certain matters for consideration at a future council meeting. So, Madam City Clerk and Ms. Roxanne Stone, I understand you will be assisting us in letting us know whether there are public comments. Are there any public comments for us?
Good morning, Madam Mayor. At this time, there are no public comments.
Thank you. I'll give you 30 seconds to scroll through your screen again, as sometimes we have to miss those because they come in with a little delay. Please take a look and let me know again. Thank you.
Okay. And there are no raised hands, no public comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Okay, so we will be moving on to the portion of the agenda that is designated as a workshop. We will be discussing, we'll be hearing and learning about the American Rescue Plan Act, acronym ARPA, and the action before us is to engage in this workshop and receive public input. Ms. Guillory, Director of Finance, will be presenting information to us, and then we will have consultants who have joined us to facilitate the discussion portion of the meeting, and comments and questions will be facilitated in this open workshop format following staff's presentation. Comments and questions will be taken one at a time in the order in which hands are raised in Zoom. Members of the public may raise their hands more than once for follow-up comments and or questions. We may hear a little bit more about that again later. As for now, Ms. Guillory, please present us with your report.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez-Rubin, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem Salimi, members of the City Council, city staff, and also members of the public. Thank you for taking time out of your Saturday morning to join us for this workshop to discuss the American Rescue Plan Act funds and the allocation that was provided to or distributed to Pinole, and we'll be looking at ways and discussing ways to best allocate those funds to serve the needs of the public. And this is mostly in response to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I will go ahead and share my screen. I do have a short presentation before we get into the discussion phase of the meeting. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Okay. So this presentation was put together in conjunction with our consultants, HDL, and we have two representatives with us today, Barry Foster and also Sandra Meyer. Both come with an extensive background and experience in the public sector, and is also working with other communities on the same matter to help facilitate meetings and engage the public, as well as working with us to ensure that we abide by the guidelines set forth by the U.S. Department of the Treasury for the allowable uses of the funds. So for today's agenda, we've received a welcome and introduction from the mayor. I'll provide an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act. We'll then open the meeting up for public proposals and ideas and thoughts on how to spend the funds. We'll then move on to individual city council member proposals, and then we'll end with our closing remarks in preparation for the next workshop. Again, just want to emphasize that this is to focus on the allowable uses of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, which comes with a number of stipulations as spelled out in the staff report, and we'll also be discussing during this meeting. But this will be an open forum, so the public will be allowed to provide comment throughout the meeting as we go through the discussion, and we really want to emphasize dialogue between the members of the public and the city council and staff members who have also joined us to give their input and answer questions that may come up on their on areas that fall within their departments. So just general background, ARPA is a $1.9 trillion federal stimulus aid package. It was enacted in March of 2021 by President Biden. Within the ARPA, there's the earmark funding for the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, and this provided $350 million in, $350 billion in stimulus funding for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. For Pinole, before we get into the actual allocation, some of the allowable uses fall in 4 major categories. Depending on the source, these categories are further broken down in some areas, but overall, these are the 4 general categories. And one is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this includes things or efforts to mitigate and or prevent the spread of the COVID virus. It also includes replacing lost or delayed revenues for general government services. It can also be used for or to address negative impacts on local businesses and individuals. And Pinole actually implemented the business assistance program that helped with some of those impacts of the pandemic on local businesses. So a program similar to that will fall under this category. And then lastly, it can be used to invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So as I mentioned, we're working with HDL for assistance. They have lots of expertise. As I mentioned, they continue to monitor the legislation for changes. Staff is also doing the same to make sure that we follow the guidelines as closely as possible and spending the funds in the most effective and efficient way. HDL is also working with some of our neighboring communities, with the most immediate community being Hercules. This also provides us with a network of other communities to work with as we go through this process. So Pinole's allocation of the ARPA funds was a total of $4.6 million. According to the U.S. Department of the Treasury guidelines, the disbursements will happen in two parts. So we received the first allocation, or 50% of the total, in July of 2021, and we will receive the second part, $2.3 million, next year in July. Also, the funds must be allocated or obligated by December 31st, 2024, and they must be spent by December 31st, 2026. And any unspent funds will have to be returned to the Treasury. So Pinole did not set any guiding principles for spending the funds. However, the Government Finance Officers Association offers some general guiding principles that we should keep in mind as we have these discussions and develop our spending plan. And just a few things to remember is that the ARPA funds are temporary in nature. So we should be mindful of any new programs or expanding any existing programs. We want to ensure that they are sustainable beyond 2026 when the funds run out or are fully spent. We also want to look at opportunities for partnering with other agencies, including nonprofits, to provide as much support as we can to businesses and individuals, and also be a resource for businesses and individuals in guiding them or referring them to other programs that are out there, such as through the state and through the county and other jurisdictions. We also should take time and careful consideration of the ARPA funds. We have a few years, so we don't want to rush and spend the funds. We want to really be mindful of how we allocate the funds, which is why we're having these workshops and discussions and working on a full strategy for allocating those funds. So we do need to be mindful that we have to obligate them by December 31st, 2024, but we want to be careful in our approach to make sure that we're following guidelines and make sure that we're providing the best benefit to the community. So Pinole's revenue loss calculation came out to be approximately $2 million, which is equal to the first disbursement that we've received. We're pretty close, just a difference of $300,000. And what that means is that component can be used for general government services. So there are some pretty tight restrictions on the parameters for spending the funds. However, this component is a lot more flexible because it's backfilling lost revenue, which means we could also fulfill some of those delayed infrastructure projects or things that may not fall under any of the other allowable uses. So the calculation was based on a template or a tool that was provided to all communities to use. It's a standard calculation tool. And as I mentioned, that came out to approximately $2 million, and HDL has vetted the calculation for us, so we're confident that it is accurate. Some of the ideas that HDL put forward for the use of the ARPA funds include small business relief grants, community gift card program to support local businesses, food assistance programs, rent or utility assistance, and health and safety enhancements of public facilities, which could also be linked to infrastructure in the water, sewer, and broadband systems. So the city launched the business recovery survey on September 24th, and it's been open for 2 weeks now. We are actually going to leave the survey open and give others some time to also complete that. And some of the highlights that came out of that survey, which will be used as we consider different initiatives for this funding, were the top businesses that reported the highest impact were in the beauty and personal services, the finance, insurance, and real estate sectors, and also fitness center and gym sectors. 86% of the respondents reported negative impacts by the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the top negative impacts included loss of revenue, reduced customer demand, and temporary closure of businesses. Some of the relief funding or assistance that businesses received included none, which was one of the top reportings. And then there was assistance that was received from the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. The California Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant also assisted our businesses here in the city, and then the Small Business Assistance Program that was administered by the city of Pinole. Businesses also reported a number of their greatest challenges to recovery, and the top three were cash flow, marketing of their services and products, and also securing future financing. So I just wanted to share what we've received so far. This is from 15 respondents, and we hope to get more input or have more businesses complete that survey, so we will leave it open for additional responses. So some of the tasks underway and next steps includes the business survey was launched. It's gonna stay open. We have the first community workshop today, which is more of a brainstorming session. So the goal is to see what priorities rise to the top. And then for the second community workshop on November 6th, we'll start the decision-making process. By then, we will have input and comments from today's meeting, as well as analytics from the business recovery survey. And we're also going to be launching the general community survey, and everyone will be invited to complete that survey. We'll be doing that using a different tool. We're going to use a balancing act, and this is a simulation tool, and it'll include all the components of the ARPA funds, and you'll be able to prioritize and also provide input on how you would like to see the funds spent. So that will be rolled out soon, and we're asking all community members to provide their input through that tool. As we go through this process, we'll be continuously analyzing feedback from the surveys and input from community workshops, and then also through city council meetings, and eventually develop our ARPA strategy and funding allocation. There are some reporting requirements that we'll have to do early next year, so that will be a part of those requirements. So that concludes the overview. We'd like to open up the floor if there are any questions on the ARPA Act itself or on the guidelines. If any clarification is needed, we would ask to do that now before we get into the actual conversation and ask for input and feedback on the funds.
Thank you, Director Guillory, for that presentation. And I see some raised hands among the tiles that I've got visible. Councilmember Tate, your question, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, does the emergency operations plan and upgrades that we had talked about, over the last few years qualify as infrastructure or emergency response? That language wasn't in this particular document, but I'm not sure if that, when they say COVID relief, is the intent for us to strengthen, harden our backup resources when it comes to emergencies?
So yes, I would say, and I'm not totally familiar with the actual plan, but on the revenue loss component of the ARPA funds for the general government services, given its flexibility, that could be a consideration for that funding.
And can you just go over real quickly again the $2 million that was calculated versus our actual losses?
So that was the actual losses.
I see. And was it 2 million flat, or was it like?
No, I have the
actual number.
The actual number. Yes,
I
I can provide the actual number.
Okay, great.
Hey, if I may just add there, Director Guillory and Councilmember Tave. So that $2 million is the calculated amount based on a standard calculator. There's no real way of knowing, there's no control group. There's no real way of knowing exactly how much the city lost. So this is what we calculated specifically for the purpose of what's eligible for ARPA reimbursement. And they have that's a particular methodology that Treasury and other experts have developed. And we think that's consistent with our intuition about it. But for instance, you really don't know how much sales tax or TOT was actually foregone because there's nothing to compare it to. So we think that's a fine estimate.
I guess what I'm asking is we have a balanced budget now, right? And with the balanced budget now, this 2 million, we were able to weather COVID-19 to get us to this point. But looking back, we're saying, okay, can we recover any of those costs through the ARPA fund?
Yes.
And up to $2 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, a couple of questions on the infrastructure where it's stated water, sewer, and broadband. Are other infrastructure improvements like sidewalks and that sort of thing eligible, and storm drains?
So not under the investment and infrastructure category itself, which lists those three main items. But again, we could look at using the revenue loss component for that.
Okay, and then my other question is, would staff be able to identify things, items that are already budgeted that would fit into these restricted funds, and then free up general fund, which is less restrictive, for things like the emergency operation plan?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Murphy?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I actually have two questions. I wanted to ask about the, actually two questions with regards to this consultant and the scope of work. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the role of the consultant with this work?
Sure. So I'm just going to pull up the draft. So there are three main items under the scope of work for the consultant. And one is to review the revenue loss calculation, which they've done. The other part is to help facilitate the workshops. They also assisted with they provided us with the survey, the business needs survey. There'll be a resource for making sure that we abide by the guidelines set forth by the Treasury. They are staying abreast, like I said, of the legislation, and will serve as a resource for us for that. And then as we start to allocate the funds for specific expenditures, just making sure that those are allowable uses of the funds.
Great. And that consultant is HDL.
HDL, yes.
Wonderful. You mentioned, I think on one of your slides about the consultant also representing other cities. I was wondering around coordination with ARPA funds. Are we allowed to work with other cities on any project? Can we merge money together? How does that look? What does that look like? Can we have a workshop together if we, plan that?
So I don't know if Barry or Sen.
I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can certainly work with a neighboring city. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. There's nothing in the rules or guidelines about that. I don't think you could merge your money. Your allocation is still your allocation, but if you're looking to fund something jointly, you could, but you'd have to just document that and show how you're participating together and all that. But certainly we just started. Gosh, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago we had our kickoff meeting with the city council in Hercules. But Hercules might be a natural maybe to talk about doing some things jointly. And sometimes you might have a nonprofit that might serve both communities or serve a broader area. So I think that could be a logical fit too. So I think there's ways that you could do that too. So earlier the comments that the finance director talked about, I think because of the revenue loss, a little bit over $2 million in your first tranche that you received in July is a little over $2.3 million. Moving that to the general fund, and we're advocating that for all our clients, is that moving that to the general fund, any revenue loss that you have really gives the city maximum flexibility to spend those money. So you can do any general government services. The only thing you really can't do is use that money for pension costs, for a tax cut, for debt obligation. But it gives you a broad array of things that you can do with that. And so it just, like with infrastructure, it goes above and beyond kind of the tight fit that ARPA has for infrastructure, which is broadband, water, sewer, stormwater improvements. If there's an expansion, and you have to have kind of a water quality feature into that too. But that gives you a chance to do other kind of more traditional infrastructure programs like roads, sidewalks. You could look at parks, some of those things. It just really kind of gives you, it broadens it, but so it moves any general government service you can do. But we're still advocating to our clients that they continue to do recovery type activities with that money. But it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of the use of those funds.
Sure. I'd be particularly interested in seeing how we can do or explore at least joint efforts with some of the surrounding cities, especially around the infrastructure ideas. It seems like if we were able to, capitalize off of working together in collaboration, it would make our COVID-19 relief go bigger and better. I also imagine that there are certain residents in other cities that are impacted by coming to Pinole and vice versa. So if that were an option, I'd love to explore more with the consultant or with staff to see what options we have moving forward. I just have one last question. Really excited about the Balancing Act tool. Thank you so much for leading that, and for I'm looking forward to putting that out there. I was just wondering around really execution and maybe even just literacy of getting that tool out. Are there any plans of a training of a public training about how to use that tool, or a one-pager on how to use that tool? I'm really excited to use it. I'm happy to use it, but I think there are some folks in our community who may be challenged with technology a little bit more, and I think I want to make sure we provide opportunities for them. So any thoughts on that tool and the training around it?
Sure, I will note that. I think that's a good idea to have at least a one-page reference for users. One thing about it is it's very user-friendly, so that's always a good start. It can be customized in so many different ways. So there could be an opening screen that introduces the user to the tool, and where we could provide the one-pager with the instructions. And of course, staff is always prepared to assist with that as well. But we could look into having a public meeting where we do a demonstration too.
Great, yeah.
I'd be open to that. Okay.
I think that'd be wonderful. Even putting it on one of our future council meetings before our next workshop. Something short, but
okay.
This power of screen share these days is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem Salini?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Back in 2019, HDL made a presentation and provided us a report called the Inside Market Analytic Report. And that market actually included something called the Consumer Demand and Market Supply Assessment. And what they did is basically they looked at the city of Pinole, Contra Costa County, and the state of California, and they tried to match what the demand was and what the supply of the market was. And one specific area that the city of Pinole was actually gapping was something called a dealership in terms of motor vehicles. And I know that we have a city manager that was very successful in bringing a dealership, CarMax in Pleasant Hill, 3 years ago. So my question to you here is, when I look at your report from 2019, I can see that the demand in the city of Pinole is roughly about $4 million of demand for car dealership that people in Pinole want to buy every year. And if you were to net as 10% tax, is that how much the sales tax would be, Andrew, on a car sale? About 10%? Yes.
1% is what City Pinole will get on a car transaction.
Yeah, so the overall rate is for, yes, ballpark 10%, but the city only gets a portion of that. And we do have very local sales and use tax as well.
Thank you. So my question is, can we use this money to develop and invite businesses to come and can we use that money as an incentive to bring businesses inside of the city of Pinole to increase our sales tax?
I can answer that. So it, under ARPA, under the rules of ARPA, that would not be an eligible use, but by moving the money to the general fund, it gives you that maximum flexibility. You could do that there. And I was the person actually that gave the report back in 2019 with the Insight report. So I'm very familiar with that. But yeah, so it gives you, moving that money to the general fund really opens up the possibilities for funding. And so ARPA is very restrictive in terms of eligible uses. It touches on some economic development, but the opportunity to move the money to the general fund really broadens and opens up what the council might want to do.
Okay, that's great to know. I'm glad to hear that we have the opportunity of moving it to the general fund that would actually help us to have a broader variety. So that's great. Thank you. That concludes my question.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Salimi. A few questions from me. When we talk about the $2 million estimated losses by the city of Pinole, that in my mind means that there's an easy answer to use of these funds, but not necessarily the best use of these funds would be to pay up to get reimbursement for those, right? Losses, and that would take up the $2 million that have been allocated to us this go round. Would that be accurate?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't catch the first part of the question.
The loss, the revenue loss that has been estimated for the city of Pinole is $2 million. So one easy approach, but not necessarily the best and or recommended, is that the city would request reimbursement for its losses and take up $2 million of the 2.3 that's been allocated this time around, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Mayor Martinez-Rubin, yes. It's in a sense it's taking it up because you're using 2.3 of 2 of the initial 2.3, but you're using it in the sense that you're depositing into the general fund, and then you can immediately turn right around and spend it on anything that's an allowable use of the general fund. So it's not really using it up in the sense that it's a final expenditure of those funds on something. It's just kind of taking our credit in terms of our allowable reimbursable amount through this lost revenue. But it instantaneously appears in the general fund as $2 million of new unassigned fund balance that the council can do whatever it would like with.
That's correct. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you for that explanation. So on that note, this matter of transferring funds to the general fund and flexibility seems very attractive, but I want to be clear and have the public be clear as well that with regard to accounting for those funds, that is going to, and correct me here, but that would be accounting specific in a way specific that we would be able to assess by 2026 that indeed the ARPA funds were used in particular ways. that matched or coincided and very much aligned with eligible or allowed expenses. Is that correct?
That is correct. The accounting mechanism has been set up for that, and there will be project codes assigned so that we can clear, because there's a reporting requirement as well. So, yes.
Thank you. Okay, let me ask, in those estimated losses, was the child care program, what we know as Tiny Tots, is somehow affiliated with the city? Again, correct me if that is wrong. Was that part of that estimate?
Yes, it was. It took into account all governmental funds, so not just general fund, but any funds that provided general services. So all recreation, the recreation fund itself was included, which includes all of those programs such as Tiny Tots.
Thank you. And I did have a follow-up question. I think your answer answers that. And that is the recreational / to the extent that we have any cultural enrichment programs in the city also have been as included in those estimated losses.
Yes.
Okay.
The loss of fees in user fees mainly.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Those were my questions. And I see Councilmember Tave's hand raised as well. So Councilmember Tave.
So I wanted to ask a couple follow-up questions. So what were those cultural losses, the cultural cost losses? Like what was the dollar amount, or do we have that calculation?
So I would have to pull the detail because that's more of a line item within the program.
Okay.
And we looked at overall loss at the program level, but I could definitely pull the details on that.
Because my concern, and I mean, this is past, to me it feels like we've gotten through COVID, we're trying to recover costs, but we're passing money through. And to the mayor's point, when we're talking about accounting, when we pass money through to the general fund, we're still going to have to say, hey, we spent this on infrastructure and all the other rules that apply. And from what I can tell, the cultural element is not included in as a recoverable item, right? Or a money that we can spend this on.
Well,
so like parks, for example, parks have a enrichment, and there's a jump that you can make that, you know, it's for well-being, right, and mental health, and you could tie in all of these elements from the ARPA fund to justify using money for those parks. What I'm getting at is how far can you stretch that before it doesn't comply with what ARPA is asking for? Because to me it seems very specific, the request that they're asking.
So I'll ask Barry to chime in on this, but so if we claim reimbursement for lost revenue, and that gets deposited into the general fund, then that money can be used for any purpose allowed by general fund resources. You're no longer within that envelope of the specific other items that ARPA is restricted to. So once it moves to the general fund, that money can be spent on infrastructure, on new things. It's separate from the buckets, the other buckets of ARPA: sewer, broadband, water, assistance to businesses.
Yeah, and if I can, that's absolutely correct. Once you move it to the general fund, again, you're going to earmark and put it into a special fund. It can still be used for recovery type activities. But then it really broadens it. You're not having to adhere 100% to those rules and regulations in terms of what is an eligible project. And if I can just maybe I know a bunch of folks have asked questions about the revenue loss calculation. I'll try to make it a little bit simple about what it does. And so the calculation is something that that Treasury put together as part of ARPA. And so it's a methodology that they put together to show revenue loss. And so what the formula, the methodology uses is you go back to the last fiscal year prior to the pandemic starting. So you go back to fiscal year 18-19. So you look at all the revenue that the city had for kind of general government services, general fund, and it would include parks and recreation and a few other things. And so it's going to include property tax, sales tax, TOT, business license tax, you know, all those revenues. And so it puts those together. So you're measuring that for that fiscal year prior to the pandemic, so it's 18, 19, and then they allow you to put together a growth factor, a growth rate, and so they allow you to use 4.1%, or if you had a greater increased growth, so you get to measure the 3 years before the pandemic, and you get to average your growth rate. And so if your growth rate exceeds 4.1, you can use that growth rate. If it's less, then you use the 4.1. And so I think, Markeisha, I think you used the 4.1 in your calculation because you had a couple of years that you had not as much growth, and I'm not sure what happened there, but it was a little bit less. And so the 4.1% growth. So you have that. So what you do for ARPA allows you to do revenue loss calculation for calendar year 2020, 2021, 22, and 23, so 4 years. So we have actuals in for 2020. So Markeisha has those, and so you measure those versus the pre-pandemic year. You have the multiplier for the 4.1%, so that they call that the counterfactual. So that's what Pinole's revenue would have been if the pandemic didn't happen. And then you measure to what actually came in. And then if it's less than that, that's your revenue loss. So in this case, for Pinole was $2,450,000. So just a little bit over $2 million. So that's your general fund. That's your revenue loss. So it doesn't really mean that that's what Pinole had in loss because of the pandemic. It's per the formula that was established by Treasury and by ARPA. So you do that same calculation for 2021. So we're 9 months in, so we have 9 months. So I think Markeisha probably has a little bit of idea what's going to happen in this year. But after the next 3 months, she'll go ahead and do another calculation to see if there's another revenue loss. And you're allowed to then move that into, and you can do it for 22 and 23. And so it gives you a little bit of a chance to experience that revenue loss.
So Barry, I guess what I'm saying is this is a modeled revenue loss, not the actual revenue loss, right?
That's correct.
And if it's modeled, then my concern is making sure that this is equitable. Pinole has done a lot of work to get through COVID, that we've been able to balance, through this and provide and still provide services. And I'm just trying to make sure that if we don't take the full 2 million or to actually balance what we actually lost with some cushion moving forward. But it's something to consider as we move forward. It's just that I'm trying to make sure that we stay consistent with the language. This is a modeled loss, not the actual loss, because we actually made it through pretty well. And that's, so this is money that it can go to the community. It can go to the actual funds. It doesn't necessarily have to bounce back to the general fund.
Absolutely. Hats off to you and the rest of your colleagues on the council for doing that, because you put yourself in much better shape. So then you can take this money, use this money for recovery type activities to really help benefit the community now and going forward. A couple of communities that we're working with, it hasn't probably been the case. They've had to use some of that revenue loss to help balance their budget, which they've got to do. But again, I think you're in a much better position to take the money and then still do recovery type activities. But it just gives you, again, that maximum flexibility. So I think your stewardship in terms of managing the process, getting through to where we're at today, is a great thing. The pandemic, I think, unfortunately, is going to be around here for a while, and so COVID is going to be around for a while. We have the new Delta strain. There are going to be other Delta. There are going to be other strains that are going to come forward too. And so, COVID, unfortunately, is going to be around, I think, for a couple of years or more. So I think we're seeing a lot of improvement in sales tax. Has really been kind of robust in this year and next year. But I think looking at helping with that recovery now in the future is a real plus, and these funds will help with that.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor, for the follow-up.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, and I will turn to staff to let me know if I am missing anyone. Otherwise, we will. I'll give you a moment to let me know. I don't see any other comments from council members or raise hands for questions. So let's proceed and turn to the public, and I will turn to Ms. Stone and our city clerk for assistance with that.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we do have several hands raised. Start with Rafael Menace.
Greetings, Mayor, Council, staff, and fellow members of the public out here. The first question that I had, I guess, was just addressed by the folk from HDL about the formula that was used for calculating the reduction in revenue, and it looks like it was the same formula as was listed in Section 3.5 of the Frequently Asked Questions PDF that Treasury put up on its website, page 14 of that FAQ, where it's based on your revenue times 1 plus growth adjustment to the exponential power of number of months divided by 12 minus actual general revenue. I was wondering if it would be possible to have a comparison of that number, as Councilmember Tave noted, to the actual lost revenue of the city, because I strongly suspect the city did not have 4% annual growth in prior years, and therefore the estimated loss calculated by this formula would be greater than an actual loss. But I don't know that offhand. My second question is with regards to wastewater. I know that Public Works has in the past brought up that the city has extensive work that needs to be done on the wastewater system to deal with inflow and infiltration issues, something on the order of $1 million+ worth of work due to the age of the system. And I was wondering whether stormwater and wastewater refurbishment fell under the sewer subcategory of infrastructure and the allowable uses of funds, or whether it fell outside of that category. I've heard sort of differing views on that in this presentation, so I wanted to make sure that got cleared up. And I think those are my two questions about the particular nature of this program. I'll have other questions and comments later on what funds should be spent on and so on.
Thank you. So as questions are raised by members of the public, staff will respond to those. They are the technical experts. So here I hear a question related to finance and another related to our water treatment plant.
Well, I'm happy to take a crack at those, and then we can tag team. Regarding the lost revenue, there's no way for the city to know what we would have received had COVID not occurred. So we've talked a little bit about this lost revenue calculation tool, which we've used for ARPA-specific purposes. 4%, what is 4% the right number? It's hard to say. That's not, that is probably in the realm of realistic long-term growth. We could go back and look at the prior year's growth factor and run an alternate calculation based on the average of the prior 3 years. But, it's not a consistent line anyway, so I would not recommend going through the exercise of looking at the past growth factors. I think a reasonable, already existing estimate would be the past 5-year forecast that we've included in the budget. If somebody wanted to look at what the total revenue the city was anticipating receiving and compare it to the actuals, that would be an existing resource one could look at. Regarding the stormwater and sewer, the uses of stormwater and sewer funds for those purposes, the infiltration issue with our sewer collection system is considered a sewer issue, not a stormwater issue. So I feel quite confident that improvements to the sewer collection system that addressed infiltration, which creates some volume and capacity issues for us, would be eligible expenses of the ARPA funds. We're in the midst of, we already have a consultant who is underway in work completing a sewer collection system assessment. They're going to be looking at where our shortcomings are and where we should be making investments. So And that's true kind of coincidentally for the city in a number of different places. As you know, we have a consultant on board who's creating an economic development strategy. We're doing other capital needs assessments. And so perhaps for Pinole more so than for some other communities that already have plans on the shelf and ready to go, it probably does make sense in general for us to wait a little bit longer before making final determinations about how to spend our funds, because we want to see what is recommended by these forthcoming studies, particularly in something like economic development. So, you know, I've talked with some of you about staff's recommendation and HDL's recommendation at this point. You know, the city council and city might want to provide some immediate assistance to small businesses that we know have suffered as a result of COVID. But before doing anything large in economic development, it probably behooves us to see what the economic development strategy suggests. I think that's answered all the questions. Let me know if there's anything else, or colleagues, Barry, other city staff, feel free to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, I would agree with the city manager. It's I think it's important to figure out some of your immediate needs to help. Because I think small businesses is one thing that I think we'll know more when we get some more results from the business survey. But I think that could be a short-term need. But I think that again, it's not a race to spend these monies. You don't even need to spend the first tranche in the first year. You've got the flexibility to push things off, do the necessary planning to make sure that you're making wise investments with these funds. So I think that as long as you obligate the money by the end of 24 and spend it by the end of 26, that's really what you need to do.
Thank you. Ms. Stone?
Okay. David Ruport.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is David O'Rupert Jr. Most of you know me. I'm an attorney, but I also am speaking on behalf of a number of Pinole citizens. I just want to reference a letter that I sent to most staff and thank Mr. Murray for answering some of the questions I had in that particular letter. And I believe other members of City Council do have that letter. I listened to this portion of what the consultant has explained, and I do have a couple of specific questions, and we can move on to later questions as the seminar moves. But my first question relates to the fact that one, we've been following this program for quite a while, and also the CARES Act program as far as application monies to our city. And I'm to understand that there's $4 million plus allocated. I just heard a few minutes ago, based on that portion of the program that we're talking about, is actual projected city losses, that we have $2 million worth of projected losses. And I also heard the city manager say that there's no way of actually fixing this number to an exact number because it's projected. My concern is that this question, and I didn't hear the answer completely, but is this considered by the city a priority item that needs to be addressed? And if so, then that reduces the number of $4 million. So could somebody answer the question, is this a priority issue for the city to recoup this projected loss? And if so, are you going to rate that higher than other potential uses for this $4 million?
Thank you, David, for the question, and thanks for your letter the other day. I think it raised a lot of important considerations. The workshop we're having today is to provide information to the council and the community about the amount of ARPA funds we're going to be getting and the allowable uses, and for the council to start to identify some priorities for expending those funds. And then we're going to have a follow-up workshop on November 6th, during which the council is going to make decisions. So whether or not using a portion of the $4.6 million to repay ourselves for lost revenue is a priority is exactly what we're going to be discussing today, and the council is ultimately going to be deciding at the next workshop. So no decision has been made by the council yet about the prioritization of the use of the funds. That's just one option that's been surfaced among many.
Thank you. I have a second question, which is a broad question, which eventually I guess we'll get to the answer. I do notice that we had discussion at City Council over the past few months, and again, the group of people I'm working with has been following this very closely, and there was some mention to whatever we decided using these funds for from ARPA, that we're going to semi-earmark and identify them for as a separate fund. Now I hear talk that we're considering dumping this into a general fund, which would in some effect dilute the original intention of ARPA guidelines, and I use the word ARPA guidelines because the legislation is complex, and I think you and I both agree that it requires a lot of work, and you've been working on it, and the people I've been working on this. But as a strict constructionist, are you indicating that these funds are, at least the intent of the funds is to go beyond the original intent of the act as enacted by Congress, to dump them into a general fund so you have more flexibility? Is this what you're suggesting you would like to do?
So I guess my take on that is a little bit different. It's a completely allowable and intentional and identified appropriate use of ARPA funds for cities to repay themselves for lost revenue. So the city opting to do so, and the drafters of the legislation and the regulators who are implementing it understand that that means that those revenues, those repaid revenues, would flow to whatever locations they were presumed to be lost from, and then spent in accordance with how, for an example of the general fund, how the general fund is allowed to be expended. So it's not at all my perception. I don't think it's the drafters of the legislation's perspective or Treasury's perspective that if we follow the process of using the tool to estimate our lost revenue, claiming reimbursement for that, depositing into the general fund, and then spending it on any allowable general fund purpose, I think that's completely and entirely consistent with the ARPA legislation. That's one allowable use. There are many other allowable uses. So I just think we should all be perfectly clear about that. That's not a subversion of the intent of ARPA. That's a very specific, intentional intent of ARPA. The question of funds versus tracking or accounting, we use those. The term fund has a couple different meanings. It has a very specific meaning in governmental funds accounting. So public agencies have a particular method, a approved national method of accounting for funds, generally accepted accounting principles. So there are various mechanisms for financial reporting purposes, for budgeting purposes. So when we've said that we will be tracking the ARPA funds, what that really means is, and Director Guillory mentioned this earlier, means we'll use something called account codes and project codes to track those funds as they flow to different kinds of expenditures. So we'll always be able to look at the ultimate end expenditure that was related to ARPA funds and roll those all back up to ARPA. That's a slightly different meaning based on these generally accepted accounting principles, we have to put things into different funds for different purposes. So if we claim reimbursement of lost revenues, from an accounting perspective, as is required by national standards, those will be deposited into the general fund. That's not a dilution, that's not a redirection. That's exactly what accounting principles require, but we'll always be able to keep track of the ultimate expenditures and roll those up to report everything we did for ARPA, and we will need to do so to satisfy Treasury. Hope that answered your questions. If that has raised any questions among anybody, council members, let me know.
One last question and I'll stop. Again, this rhetorical question, I've been to a few rodeos on city expenditures like redevelopment. And my question is, just because it's allowable, does that mean it's in the best long-term interest of the city by reallocating ARPA funds to something that may have nothing to do with ARPA in the originator's mind of drafting this legislation?
So the question of the best use is what council is going to be deciding. So we'll be leaving that to them. But I think it was the intention. So if you followed the drafting and advocacy for this legislation, It was the advocates really wanted to provide direct and flexible assistance to local governments. So in fact, these specific requirements of the ARPA funds or buckets are actually much narrower than I think the drafters were originally intending. And that was, it was kind of whittled and narrowed through the legislative process. But you might recall various conversations and public statements from our representatives, including Representative Congressman Thompson, who really wanted cities to be able, and city councils and communities to be able to decide how to expend these funds because they had the best understanding of the local impacts of COVID and the local needs. So actually the resulting final legislation, I think through the sausage making process, became somewhat more narrower than was originally envisioned. But it was always the intention, I think, of the advocates that cities receive this direct and as flexible as possible assistance because the cities are in the best position to understand how they were impacted and to understand where they should make expenditures to most strongly emerge from COVID. So again, I think it's completely consistent with the legislation, with Treasury's interpretation, that there be quite a bit of flexibility in how these funds be expended to help cities who know best how to position themselves for recovery.
Yeah, and if I could just piggyback on that too, I think you're absolutely 100% right on. So if you look at the legislation, if you look at the interim rules, in a number of places, it talks about they're giving you broad categories that you can spend for ARPA dollars, but they're really leaving it to the government, to the local government, specifically to go ahead and put together programs that best meet the needs of your community. And I would encourage you all to go back, look at the interim rules and look at the section on revenue loss on that calculation. It specifically says that you're allowed to take that revenue loss and move it to the general fund, and it specifically says that the government then is allowed to do that for a broad range of uses that best meet the needs of your community. And so, and again, you're earmarking, you're targeting those funds, but it really was, as the city manager talked about, it really was the intent of ARPA, and so I think that's a good thing. And I think in this case, you are still doing those recovery type activities.
Were there further questions, Mr. Rupert?
For now, no. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Stone.
Yes, Frankie Martinez.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mayor, city staff. Appreciate your help today. As we all know, Pinole as a city is well over 100 years old, and we have some pretty significant infrastructure needs. So in consideration of that, can you give us a status on the following? One, City Manager, I heard you alluding to our sewer systems and the fact that we have a consultant reviewing that right now. Can you give us an understanding on if you have to base it on a percentage basis, can you tell us how much of our infrastructure is good today, how much of our infrastructure requires maintenance, and the potential cost for the repairs on that? So that's the first question. And then the second question along with that, again, because we're 100 years old and we have significant infrastructure needs and repairs on our city roads, can you tell us today what is the percentage of roads that we have that are in good condition? What's the percentage for repairs to these roads to get them back up to quality standards, and then the cost for that? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question, and I'll invite Misha Carr, our capital projects manager, to respond. And it's, as you mentioned, Frankie, we've got lots of different types of assets, from sewer to stormwater, roads, buildings, parks. So it's, we're in the midst of various assessments. And so Ms. Carl talked to us about the status of those and what we know right now about our deferred maintenance. Misha.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. for that question. So I will speak to the sewer system first. As our city manager mentioned, we currently have a consultant on board who is developing a sanitary sewer master plan. And the purpose of that master plan, they're going to evaluate our sewer system for the structural integrity. They're going to look at the capacity to convey existing and model future wastewater discharges. And part of that, as I mentioned, there's a hydraulic modeling that will take place, and we are in the middle of developing that master plan along with our consultant. And the final master plan will recommend short and long-term projects to improve the reliability of our system and address any future needs. That plan also includes existing operations and maintenance practices that will identify some opportunities to improve the current level of services. The modeling that we're currently in the process of getting done, that's going to simulate current and future flows. And there's a mix of recommendations that can come out of that, which could be resulting in upsizing pipe, taking care of our pump stations, possibly adding more pump stations. So we're working through those, this matrix and value engineering of the best solutions. And when that master plan is done, we'll have a better idea of some of the questions that you've asked in detail. We don't have quite that level of detail yet. And as it relates to the roads, we use a Street Saver software where we get grant funding almost on a 2-year cycle. Similarly, a consultant comes out, they visually inspect every piece of pavement in Pinole. There's a rating system which goes into a decision tree matrix that finally a report is prepared that lays out every street in Pinole. What we do have is kind of a score, a pavement condition index score that's given to Pinole each year, and we're able to look at that. And that report kind of classifies which roads are eligible for a slurry, which ones are good for a mill and fill, which ones have completely deteriorated. So that report is also forthcoming. The consultant is supposed to come visit Pinole within the next 3 weeks here to give us a better idea. And hopefully we can answer those questions in further detail.
And so, Nisha, a follow-up question on that is, what we've seen historically in Pinole is the same streets just keep getting paved over and over to keep that high rating. Well, if you go through Old Town, any of the streets, they are past their line. They're seriously end of life. It's called caking, where the actual concrete looks like a cake that's just broken up in pieces, right? Those are significant road repairs. And I would think if we now have money coming in from the federal government that specifically says roads, that can we start looking at an aggressive plan to use these monies to get these roads repaired appropriately?
And to speak to that further, the approach that the city has used with the funding available has been the fix-it approach, like you mentioned, of performing the preventative maintenance to extend the life of the pavement effectively. But as you mentioned, there are streets that are beyond that preventative maintenance stage that we could use funding towards, and if that's something that we want to do, we can discuss that option further.
So just to, if I may, provide a sense of magnitude, and Misha, correct me if I'm wrong, but so that Misha mentioned this Street Saver software. It's a piece of software that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission provides to all Bay Area jurisdictions, as is the standardized street survey methodology. And if my memory serves me correctly, we have something like $40 million in deferred maintenance that would be required to bring all of our streets to an adequate condition. So the pavement condition index rates every street on a scale of 1 to 100, and I think our citywide average is something around 70 right now to get all of our streets, and it's an average, so you know what the pitfalls of that. If you have some really great streets and some horrible streets, you might have what looks like a respectable average, and we fully understand that there are some streets that are really beyond useful life. So we have something like $40 million of deferred maintenance on our streets that would be required to be invested if we wanted to get all of our streets, I think, to an 85. So that's, that's a significantly larger money than what we're talking about in this ARPA assistance. I will note that I think that it was intentional of the federal government not to include a broader set of capital projects as eligible projects for ARPA funds, because there's the anticipation that there's going to be new federal infrastructure funding that will cover a broader set of infrastructure. So one reason, it's my understanding, that sidewalks, streets, bridges are not allowable, specifically allowable expenditures for ARPA funds is they're expecting there'll be new federal money for that in the infrastructure bill. So the city, one reason, the reason that the city hasn't made greater progress, it's my understanding, on some of these really deteriorated roads is it hasn't had the money. And so the situation we're in right now, if we want to address those, is get as good a handle on the situation. We are intending to use both the Street Saver model, but also potentially do some additional modeling about where we can make the wisest investment if we had additional funds. And then this might be, to address it, might be something that requires a new source of revenue. So we really need to look at what the deferred issue is with the roads. It's much larger than this ARPA funding is going to be able to address. It's larger than what any additional federal infrastructure funding is going to be able to address. And the council will need to make a decision about whether it wants to reduce existing expenditures or find new revenue to make more progress on roads, but also other forms of infrastructure. So as you mentioned, we have some parks that could use some renovation. We have sidewalk improvements that could be made. We have some city buildings that will need to be renovated or replaced eventually. So I think it makes sense to look at that as a complete package. The strategic plan that the City Council adopted a year and a half ago includes, as one of the strategies or special projects, doing a complete city capital asset assessment. And we're doing that in bits and pieces, but pretty soon we'll have a very complete picture of what the state of the city's public assets and infrastructure are, so we can hatch a plan for how to bring them up to date. Sorry, I know that was a long answer, but I think that's a question that's might be on a number of people's minds, and I wanted to make sure to address that somewhat thoroughly.
Thank you for your thoughtful response. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other hands raised from the public, Ms. Stone?
Yes, Irma report.
Go ahead, Ms. Rupert.
Actually, I'm getting an error message saying that she's using an older version of Zoom, so I'm not able to allow her to speak.
Thank you. I think she experienced that in a prior meeting, so she may have to call in. Is there anyone else whose hand is raised?
Yes. Rushit Rain.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council members, and city officials of Pinole for providing us this opportunity. I'm here on behalf of Orange Theory Fitness in Pinole. Orange Theory Fitness in Pinole, California is an independently family-owned small business providing fitness solutions to our community for the past 4 years. As you know, a lot of business owners are suffering financial hardship as a result of COVID-mandated closures, and we are one of them. As gym owners, we have lost 100% of our revenue for the majority of the year during lockdown, and we're facing extreme financial hardships to pay our full rent accumulated currently, during, and past the lockdown. The last emergency ordinance passed by the Board of Directors extended the county's protection to small business from eviction until September 30th, 2021, and deferred rent payments due by November 30th, 2021. As much as we appreciate it, it is not enough for the amount of damage we all have incurred and are still accumulating. Repayment of the balance back rent of almost $200,000 by the granted period as per the ordinance is impossible, as businesses will take time to grow again. especially us, as we are a gym which involves heavy breathing in an enclosed area to which people are still not comfortable to return as compared to restaurants and other retail businesses. Even though protected by the ordinance, we still paid our triple net during the shutdown in good faith to our landlord and still received a notice of default, which we cured, putting our personal guarantees / assets at risk. For a small family-owned, independent, or franchise businesses like us, it is quite challenging as we have lost more than half of our customers. Our business model is membership-based, and it will take time to build it back. We are sure landlord-tenant issues are on rise since opening orders on June 15, 2021, and we are reaching out as a struggling small business to the city for help. There are state grants available for residential tenants, but not for small commercial tenants who now have a lot bigger debt due to the forced shutdowns. As our city council, we look up to you for empowerment and hope to fight this hardship together. Below are a few ideas we would like to propose and would humbly request the council to consider. 1, ensuring the ordinance present or in future protects us from eviction as well as any breach of lease / default due to non-payment of rents resulted from COVID-19 related hardships / mandated shutdowns. 2, provide grants to businesses to reduce their debt or help with the back rent. 3, provide low interest long-term loans with a portion of it forgivable if qualified. 4, request county to help reduce property taxes of the affected commercial properties. Like in our case, our triple net is 25% of our total rent. With the hope to sustain our business in this town, we would like to thank our council members, commerce, and the community. Yours sincerely, Orange City Fitness in Pinole.
Thank you. Ms. Stone, are there others?
Yes. Yvette Rico.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank everyone for this very informative meeting. As you all know, the pandemic has had the most severe impact on the small business community. The city of Pinole has weathered the storm. Obviously, we're going to be able to survive. The small business community, however, is still struggling to come out of COVID. And I'm a little concerned that when the city sent out a survey for information from the small business community, they only received 15 responses. We have had in the past, historically, at least 100 local businesses with business licenses here in Pinole. So I'm concerned that we did not reach out adequately to all those businesses for their feedback and to find out what their concerns are. The gentleman who just spoke very eloquently identified some of the concerns that he has in order to stay in business. Some other aspects of our business community, the restaurants have also suffered quite a bit. The city did allocate grant money to 75 businesses, but that really had some very strict criteria and parameters that not everybody could qualify for. There are bakeries, there are bars, there are small business owners that have been here for many, many years, are part of the city as a whole, and have always given back to us. We need to be able to find a way to communicate with them adequately and directly to find out what their needs are. Concerning the money that they need, do they need a low interest loans as the gentleman suggested? Do they need grant money? What exactly do they need in terms of marketing? Can we help them with that? There are so many different questions that need to be asked that I think the small business survey did not reach enough people to get the amount of information that's needed to move forward and make decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll continue, Ms. Stone.
Yes. Zachary Kim.
everyone, my name is Zachary Kim. Happy morning, happy Saturday. So I am a MPA student, Master of Public Administration student at McGeorge School of Law here in Sacramento. Also the Hispanic Latinx Caucus, Vice Chair of Political Affairs for Young Democrats of America. And I just wanted to emphasize how great the American Rescue Plan is, and really how many people it's helping. Not only is it helping those that are most vulnerable, but it's helping small businesses, it's helping really a local economy. And so I just really wanted to emphasize how important it is that we have this American Rescue Plan, and that we spend pretty much our funds appropriately, but also immediately, because there's so many people who have needs that cannot be patient on, they cannot wait for relief, and particularly our small businesses, but particularly those that rely on CalFresh and really emergency funds, especially those with children. And so, yeah, I just wanted to just say how important this plan is, how important this funding is, and if we can just continue to reach out to people, make sure that we're giving them the right amount of relief as soon as possible. We should not wait, and they cannot be patient. They have needs now. And yeah, I just wanted to just leave those remarks. And thank you so much for having this. Thank you so much for educating us. And yeah, let's keep giving the people the relief that they need.
Thank you.
And we have Sharon Sander.
Go ahead, Ms. Sander.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me. I am an artistic director and owner of Soul Dance Academy, and I am in the same boat as the gym owner. I'm living off of savings, which is depleting quickly. And the other fellow that, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, spoke about the roads and funding for all of that. I had a comment that the new source of revenue to pay for those roads and the other needs would be if these the grant money could help more businesses continue or get started, and that would create revenue for anything extra. That it'll give you the extra tax money out of our taxes, will give you the extra revenue needed. And I appreciate everything you're all doing, and I hope to rebuild my studio here and help out as much as I can. My studio does fan out to the whole community, not just the children, which have been devastated by these lockdowns and everything. So just wanted to put that out there as an idea as well.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
And we have Cameron Sasai.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council. Hope everyone is well. My name is Cameron Sasai. I'm a lifelong resident of Pinole. I would like to express the great need for small business grants in our city. Propose that we use a significant amount of our ARPA funds for this purpose. While small businesses were suffering from an economic recession throughout the pandemic, the only support that our city has given was an initial grant earlier this year that totaled $1,000 per small business at a flat rate, regardless of the many different factors that affected each business differently. While I understand that those initial grants were given out with limited funding and with a sense of urgency, we now have the time to really plan out the most efficient way to support our small businesses through a more sizable grant. I believe that the eligibility requirements for businesses should be widened, and instead of dispersing the grant at a flat rate, we should provide grants on a scale system, with the grants from as small as $2,000 and going up to $15,000 per business. This is how much businesses in our area have been needing to keep afloat with operating costs. We can also calculate how much each business would need through coefficients such as staff size pre-pandemic, household income level of the primary business owner, years that the business has been based in the city of Pinole, demographic information of the primary business owner, and a demonstrated extent of their revenue loss since the pandemic. This would be the most efficient and equitable way to approach this issue, and many Bay Area cities have been approaching it in this way through continuity grants, even without ARPA funding. I would also suggest that the council visit small businesses in our city to personally ask what business owners need in this critical time. Maybe some of you have, which is great, but maybe some of you haven't. But we really need to be out there talking to the people, because we are definitely not getting close to 100% response rate from our surveys. Just from my conversations with some small business owners in the past month, things are not looking good for a lot of them. Yes, they are being charged full rent, but some businesses were even cutting their AC through the hot weeks because that is just how much they have to cut costs during this time. Many restaurants will also be experiencing further revenue loss and reduced customer demand in the future due to families' propensity to stay and eat at home, as well as county vaccine card requirements for dine-in services. Please consider allocating a significant portion of our ARPA funds to an effective small business continuity grant for the sake of our local economy. Let's also explore more options to make our small business support efforts more sustainable, going further than a grant and focusing on local economic development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, there are no more raised hands, no more public comments.
And this is City Clerk Yogi. We did have a raised hand for Irma Rupert who couldn't connect, and then we got a message about maybe connecting via David Rupert's computer. So I want to give that speaker an opportunity to connect now.
Okay.
I wonder if we can try the mic and see if that works. Thank you.
Yes, I will unmute David Rupert.
Hello?
Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let me hang up my phone. I got you both on. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I just hung up the phone. Several comments and suggestions. Number one, customer service in the city needs to be brought up to speed. According to the backlog of 600 permits that we just found out about a couple of weeks ago, we need to bring in staff or people that we need. I know we lost a lot of staff in the past. So please, city manager or city staff, everybody who needs help, please ask for help. Let's get the people out there. Let's get these permits done. Let's open the city 5 days a week. The rec center is open. The senior center is open 5 days a week. So why isn't the city, at least a receptionist or a permit person out there? Let's bring that up to speed. Also, customer service to the community needs a lot of help. Secondly, I do agree with partnering with other cities. I know there's 3 cities out there for public buildings like Stations 74 that's closed for the public, but other places have partnered and brought their funds together to open some of these public health buildings or stations. I know we're going to get a grant hopefully next year or sometime through the county, but why wait? Do it now. You know, there's so much health problems out there with the fire and the health issues. So maybe that could be a talk later with the council. And also, what I'd like to think about is please be aware that once you turn the money, ARPA funds, into the general funds, and I do agree with my husband, we failed in many respects in the past. We got to make sure that the money is very well spent. I just read in the newspaper 3 cities whom spent the funds the wrong way. One built a stadium, a football stadium, you know, and they're finding out that that was wrong. So please I'm very concerned about that. And the other thing too is for the businesses, yes, they do need a lot of help. Let's push in some emergencies on there for the businesses. They've been there for us, so we have to be there for them. And the next thing and final is, how about air purifiers for every household in the city? a lot of us are having respiratory problems and things like that. And why not give back to the community who's done so much for you guys in terms of, assistance. So please, again, thank you, Mayor and Council, City Manager and staff, and to the consultant, everybody. Let's pitch in together and do the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more scan or scroll through the screens to see if we have anyone else remaining who would like to provide public comment, Ms. Stone.
Yes, we do have Marilyn Huff, who sent a message via the chat, so I'm going to unmute her. Ms. Huff?
Ms. Huff, if you're here.
You may have to unmute yourself.
Yes,
on
I was
your
just going to
end.
say that.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Is the HDL presentation that Director Guillory gave available on your website so that I can share it with my constituents so that we can discuss it between now and November 6th?
Yes, we'll make it available.
That would be very helpful. Also, can you tell me how many people not affiliated with the City Council are on the call today? I can't see. Usually on a Zoom call, you can see how many people, the number of people who are on the call.
This is City Clerk Yoku. I can estimate, it looks like we have about 15 members of the public that are connected at this point in time.
Again, just, many people talked about the business, how few people responded to the survey of businesses, and to have only, when you sent out a postcard to all residents and you only got 15 replies, and I mean, all residents, you should have a lot of people on your Zoom call today, I would think. And I think a part of the problem is there was no Zoom link on the postcard. And I had a very difficult time finding the Zoom link on your website. It was like going through a very difficult maze to make heads or tails out of the website. And I hope that for November 6th, when you send out the postcard, which I think is a great idea, that you will put the link in big capital letters right in the middle of the postcard so that, and I think you will get much more participation from citizens, because this is an opportunity we hope only once in a lifetime, because we hope we don't have to deal with a pandemic more than once in our lifetime, although I'm old enough to have been through the polio horror when I was a child. And if that Zoom link had been on the postcard, I'm sure that you would have many, many more people today involved in this call. But I appreciate your willingness to open this up to the public, and it's a very, very important decision-making process for all of us.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Huff, because you mentioned the word constituents, I'm curious who they are. You said you'd like to make the information available to your constituents.
I live in senior housing here and in Pinole, and I have a group here that's very interested, involved in the Pinole community and in political action and in social issues. And we like to stay involved, and we're a very active senior group, and we meet twice a month, and we're very interested in, we live right near the bridge between here and Hercules, so that project, of course, is very interesting to us. We're just a very involved senior group that cares deeply about what goes on in Pinole.
Thank you very much for helping us out in involving and introducing any new members, be they seniors or otherwise, to being involved. And thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
If I may, Mayor Martinez Rubin, a couple comments have come in about the business survey, and so I wanted to address those. As you know, we did what we consider to be some pretty thorough outreach to residents and businesses by sending the postcard mentioning the 2 workshops as well as the business survey to all businesses and residents in Pinole. So my sense is that businesses are notified and have been notified of the opportunity to participate. It doesn't mean that everybody will, everybody receives a lot of mail. Everybody, certainly during these challenging times, small businesses are very, very busy. So that's not to say that they will think it's a priority to respond. We will redouble our outreach efforts to get, we also promoted the business survey through the Chamber of Commerce. It's promoted through our website and other communication channels. We'll continue to promote it. It's going to remain open, so we'll get some other input from businesses throughout. Anybody who does surveying work professionally knows that it's increasingly challenging over time to get folks to respond with this flood of information and marketing. So we'll continue to do what we can to get input. We really, really appreciate the comments of members of the public today who are in some cases speaking on behalf of local businesses. We welcome all of your thoughts about the forms of assistance that we can provide. But we have done pretty thorough outreach to businesses. We'll continue to do so. I just want it's challenging to get responses to mass mailed surveys during these busy times. So we'll continue to promote it. But I think the city has done a pretty substantial outreach on the business survey. As Director Guillory mentioned, so the business survey, I think, can be thought of as part of a needs assessment and data collection process. So we're getting input from that slice of our community about what their needs are. We're also going to be rolling out a resident survey using the tool that Director Guillory mentioned, Balancing Act, and that will be more focused on prioritization. So we're expecting that at the conclusion of today's workshop, the council will identify a few main buckets of potential priority areas of expenditure, and those will be the focus of the Balancing Act so that residents can weigh in on whether they, how they would prioritize the major buckets that council has identified. So just wanted to provide some additional information on the surveys that we're going to be deploying.
And if I could just maybe give a little more context to follow up with what the city manager said, just some of our experience in a couple cities that we've been doing surveys with too, just to let the council members know and the public. So we had a business needs survey in the city of San Leandro that we did about a month and a half ago. And so they and it's a much bigger city, but they had, and a lot more businesses, but they had 65 respondents. And again, what we kind of get back is that, businesses are just extremely busy trying to hang on and do things right now. And so, surveys sometimes don't get done, but so San Leandro had 65 respondents. We did one in Lafayette about a month ago, and Lafayette had 55. And so, and then we actually are doing a community survey. We're right in the midst of, I know that's kind of the next step in Pinole, but in Lafayette. And so it's underway right now, and we actually have close to 400 respondents for that community survey. We were actually blown away by that number in terms of people responding, and there's still about a week and a half left in that. It's going to be open for a 4-week period. But and again, when we do the community survey, the business needs survey is, I think, 15 questions, and so the community survey, again, we want to keep it kind of very simple and easy for folks to do. So typically we use 5 to 6 questions that we talk about prioritizing and what the community really wants in terms of tasks and needs that are important to them. So just to give a little more framework in terms of maybe what other cities have experienced in terms of people responding to surveys. And then we also did a workshop last week in Lafayette, and so kind of similar to this one. And they had 22 members of the public that participated in that workshop.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Foster and Ms. Meyer. You are on with us, and we will avail ourselves of your facilitation skills to take us through the next portion of the agenda, which will allow comments from council as well as input from council members. Having heard the comments from the public, each of us, I believe, will have an opportunity to also share our notions of how we believe the ARPA funds ought to be allocated. So I'm going to turn to you to help us out with that. And I see 3 hands raised already among council members. I will step back so that my hand can also be part of that at some point, so that I can present as well my notions of these ARPA funds and their use. Thank you.
I think probably the best way then is to go through one at a time, council members. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions for priorities, and certainly we'd like to hear that. We're going to have another opportunity at the next meeting. But you know, again, as the city manager talked about, we're trying to just get as much opportunity from the public. That's why we're doing this workshop and the next workshop, the business needs survey, and then ultimately the community survey, just to get a well-rounded engagement program. And so I think, but we certainly want to hear from you with initial thoughts on priorities for these funds. So I think we'll start with Councilmember Murphy.
Sure, and thank you. I'm actually going to hold off on suggestions right now. I think there are a number of public comments that I want to continue conversation around and ask questions. So I'll circle back about ideas and things that way. But I do want to just make sure to circle back around the engagement strategy. I know we talked a little bit about, you know, comprehensive engagement strategy for this process. I just want to make sure, and if either the city manager or Director Guillory, you can just elaborate what was done around these workshops in terms of engagements. So just so the public knows, I think it's important to just, again, repeat what was done in terms of the business owners where they received, I would like to know the plan of what was done. And I'll ask follow-ups.
Sure, Director Guillory, you want to describe the outreach?
Mm-hmm. So the outreach included the electronic channels that we typically use, including the city's social media. So there was a flyer created and it was posted on the city's Facebook and the city's website. It was also included in the administrative report that goes out. We also mailed the flyers to all Pinole residential and commercial addresses, and we made sure that the businesses with licenses from our database were included in that mailing. In addition to that, we provided the flyer and the link to the survey to the Chamber of Commerce, and it was promoted through their website and newsletter. We also provided hard copy flyers to Councilmember Murphy. And thanks for helping us out with that, to distribute those at a public event, or a few public events. So thanks for that support. So that was pretty much what we used as far as the outreach. I received a number of calls, so I have been in contact with folks just wanting to understand more about what we were trying to accomplish. So I spoke to several members of the public over the last week or so, via email and by phone, and following up to make sure that they had the link and the agenda packet as well, to as a reference for the workshop.
Thank you, Director Guillory, and I'm really impressed with our outreach here. I was wondering, because I did hear someone who was making public comment reference another mailer. Two questions on that question. Number one, how much did the first mailer cost to send to everyone in Pinole or all over the universe that we were sending that mailer postcard to? And second question to that, is there a plan to send another postcard for what will be a second workshop as well?
So the cost was, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was approximately $5,300. Okay. And that was for the printing, not just the mailing portion of it, but also the printing and the adjustments that needed to be done to get it on the postcard and some design aspects as well. And we were not planning to send another mailer because we had both dates on the first one, but we could revisit that.
Yeah, option. I think given the public comment, I did have some feedback, I think in addition, outside of public comment around just kind of folks not knowing where to go. I think like if with an event, I think it was a great flyer. I think we should have maybe put the Zoom link on there. If possible, I would love, and I'm happy to make a motion towards the latter of the meeting for us to send another mailer out. I think it would just be a great engagement tool, and hopefully that mailer would also include the Zoom link for our next workshop.
Yes, and I would expect that the cost will be lower because it's just kind of updating the postcard that already went out. So yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And I really do appreciate your work in terms of the flyer and the mailer. I thought that was great, and I heard a lot of, outside of the Zoom link not being on there, I heard a lot of good feedback that residents were really impressed that they received information about the ARPA workshop, and they were just like, wow, this is great. So if we can do more of that and use this as a model really for all of our issues, I think would be great. So thanks again for that. I wanted to ask about, so I brought this up several times. I think in the past, we've had a few meetings with public commenters saying things about evictions. And I think I brought this up at the last meeting around the eviction moratorium. I specifically remember us talking about the county, and I think there was some hope at some point that the county was going to extend their eviction moratorium. As of September 30th, it's my understanding that the eviction moratorium is now ending, which puts people in Pinole, renters in Pinole, business owners in Pinole that have spoken up this morning at risk of eviction. I have big concerns about that. I hope that all of us on this call have big concerns about that, because that could really hurt more people who are already hurting. And either to the city manager or the city attorney, I'd like to know our options. We're leaving people up in the air right now, and I really would like to know what immediate options we have, given what I see as our negligence here as a city in terms of having our own moratorium.
So I'll invite City Attorney Kasher. He's been the lead staff person on our previous eviction moratorium. So I'm happy to have him provide some comments on what our options are.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Councilmember Murphy. And I apologize, my voice is a little hoarse, but so the county did elect not to continue its eviction moratorium, I think as of September 21st, so it's no longer in place. The city can, consider the readoption of an eviction moratorium. I really need to look into what impact that would have, because there's now a gap in the time between the expiration of the prior moratorium and anything that the city would implement moving forward. So we would need to look into that and figure out, what impact that might have. But the city councils could certainly consider adopting its own eviction moratorium moving forward. That would be something that would need to be agendized for a future meeting, and we could talk through kind of what that would look like and what some of the options are. And that's something that we could certainly do at the staff level if that's the will of the council.
Yeah. So when you say there's a gap, and this is again one of the concerns I brought up before around the idea that our county government is governing the city of Pinole, right? I was concerned about it because we kind of left it in the hands of our county reps instead of really just protecting our own. So in my head right now, every day that we go without a moratorium on eviction is another day that someone could be evicted from their home or from their business. So just to clarify, City Attorney Patcher, do you know if it's possible to have a retroactive moratorium? So if it comes to council in a month, in 2 weeks, I mean, at this point we don't know because it hasn't even been a topic of discussion outside of my bringing it up. Is there a way to retroactively have a moratorium to protect renters or those who are impacted by what has been a really tough 2 years for all of us?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that right now. The gap that we're talking about really is, I think, about a month from when the prior moratorium expired and when something new might be implemented. But I don't know the answer to that, whether or not we could retroactively apply a moratorium. If that's something that the council would be interested in doing, I would certainly look into that and advise on the legality of doing that. But I don't know the answer to that right now.
Gotcha. To my council members, I would really urge us to see this as an emergency issue. We have 30% renters here in Pinole. We also obviously there's some folks who are impacted in housing who own homes as well. We should probably consider them likely. And I did bring this up several times. I think we really missed the mark here. And I really think this is something that is as we're talking about ARPA and direct relief, we're talking about funds, but we're also talking about policy as well. And I really think we should be talking about this in conversation, particularly because of public comments that have been made over the last several months, including today, but also because this is also another example of how we need programs in Pinole directly to Pinole residents. We can't always look to the county to support programs for our own. And I think this is one of those examples that we should see and say to ourselves and to our community that we're actually protecting them, and we need to have that force. So I hope that we can come back to this conversation at a later point. I do have a few other follow-up questions, but this is very important to me and very important to many residents in Pinole, and I hope we can take some action here either today or at our next city council meeting. I wanted to ask lastly about a emergency operations plan. I wasn't sure what the status of that is. I think either Councilmember Toms or Tave, I wasn't sure who brought it up at the beginning. But in terms of the conversation we're having today with this workshop, it seems like it probably would be in our best interest to kind of slow down funds, if you will, in terms of allocating and spending those funds. This is, of course, my own opinion and take. I also, of course, have been hearing from community members that people need direct relief, which is what I think the intent behind the American Rescue Plan Act was. And so I'm challenged with this notion that there are worse things that can happen for our city, right, coming up in terms of the trends that we're seeing in the economy. But I'm also even more challenged with the fact that we haven't done as much as I would like to in terms of really providing direct aid to our residents and, of course, our small business owners. And so as it relates to the emergency operations plan, I see that as a real important tool for us to engage and also to identify the areas most that we need in terms of support for emergencies, which we're in a state of emergency. So I wanted to know, what is the status of that emergency operations plan, and when do we think we'll be getting that? Yes, that's my first question. I'll probably have a follow-up question on that one.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that, and Chief Weinkoop, if you want to jump in. So we have a contract with a vendor to help us update our emergency operations plan. I think we're on track to have a draft for presentation to the council sometime before the end of this calendar year. So we have an existing emergency operations plan. It hasn't been updated in some time. We're going through some organizational changes. We're taking a fresh look at our facilities. So again, I expect we'll have a draft for presentation by around the end of this calendar year. So a lot of that is about establishing the protocols and roles of city staff members in the event of an emergency, but it will also identify some infrastructure, particularly around an emergency operations center that we need, that might include things like backup power to that facility. So the emergency operations plan itself is a pretty well defined. It's already funded. We already have a contract with the vendor to help us establish it. But there might be some follow-up to-dos that have some price tags on them. Particularly, as I mentioned, standing up a more robust and resilient, essentially, emergency operations center. Right now, we would be repurposed, and I think in the future as well, we would intend to repurpose an existing conference room to serve in that capacity. We don't need to have a dedicated room that sits idle to serve as the emergency operations center, but we probably need to make some upgrades in terms of backup power and IT infrastructure for that room.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on the vendor or the consultant we'll be using for the development of the emergency operations plan?
Yeah, the City Council approved work with a consulting firm called Management Partners. I think that's a contract in the amount of about $50,000 that was executed probably sometime in, I want to say, in fall 2020.
So would it be correct to assume that the emergency operations plan will be telling to how we should use ARPA funds, or do you think those are completely two different?
Yeah, so it's true we're in the midst of an emergency. And as a matter of fact, we considered whether we would use our existing emergency operations plan to respond to COVID, but it's a different kind of an emergency. So that's, a lot of the emergency operations plan is oriented towards environmental emergencies, wildfires, floods, earthquakes, and other things like that. You can use that management and response structure for pandemics, economic shocks, but it's really about identifying the structure and the protocols we'll use to respond to an emergency. And it's mostly, a lot of it is natural disaster related type emergencies. So I think the ARPA funds is being quite different. Now that said, if City Council opts to repay the city for lost revenues and deposits those funds into the general fund, the City Council could use those funds to implement, emergency response, improvements like a hardening of city facilities or things like that. But it's quite different.
Yeah. So, City Manager Murray, one of the things I'm hearing from you that does overlap is in regards to just simple communications, like having a communications model. When a natural disaster occurs, where to go, where the kind of emergency operations center is going to be, how the protocols are going to be spoken out from that center. That's one of the things that is going to be consistent, whether it's a natural disaster or public health response or public health crisis like we're in now. Correct? That is going to be a part of that plan.
Absolutely. In fact, there's multiple efforts going on with the county regarding notification and evacuation. I mean, the notification and evacuation for a public health emergency is a little bit different than, say, for a natural disaster. But yes, the EOP emergency operations plan will certainly be covering the issue of emergency communications.
Okay, so I guess my final question is, how might we use that plan to inform us of making a better decision around our funding?
I think that plan might identify some needs that the city has to be better positioned to respond to an emergency, and those would be potential uses of ARPA funds, particularly any lost revenue that we deposit into the general fund. I think that's the linkage.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
I might add one thing, and that is the distinction, and the city manager did touch upon it. The distinction between oftentimes the emergency operations plan and the emergency operations center are sometimes considered synonymous, and they're not. So the emergency operations plan will include suggestions on what next needs to be implemented. I would expect that among those recommendations would be the establishment of an emergency operations center. So the emergency operations center would be the offspring of the emergency operation, or one of the offspring of the emergency operations plan, and that might be something towards which we would allocate funds, if that if that distinction is kind of clear.
And that's actually very helpful. I guess a follow-up to that is someone made a comment about Station 74, and I'm just wondering how, so in my head, you know, I know we separate these things, but, you know, in my head, I also read studies that say, like, you know, having dirty air, for example, which is tied to, of course, like, you know, the impact of wildfires and probably oil refineries and natural gas facilities around us. You know, communities with dirtier air have higher rates of transmission of COVID-19. And that's a Harvard study. I'm happy to send that over to you, Chief Wayne Cooper or City Manager Murray. But I saw that study and I thought, okay, when I see ARPA and I see support for COVID-19 response, that's a broad, that makes it broaden the world. I hope it broadens your world too, because it makes me think about all the things of what's possible. And so then I thought, okay, great. So keep your air clean so that you have lower transmission COVID-19 transmission rates. And of course, in terms of keeping air clean, I've thought about wildfires and the need for fire safety. And of course, in Pinole, that brought me to Station 74. And so I'm wondering, how might we consider using ARPA funds to reopen Station 74, which has been a huge priority in this, at least for our public, right? We've heard public residents speak up about this time and time again, but I would like to know from you, Chief, or even the city manager, how can we connect those two? How can we connect the dots there?
Well, I think one thing that is important about considering these ARPA funds is the sustainability. In other words, reopening of fire stations is going to be something that needs to be sustained indefinitely. And so the ARPA funds being one-time funds. Be assured, though, that we're actively looking at the options into reopening Station 74 vis-a-vis Measure X funds and collaboration with county agencies and whatnot, or the county fire agency. As far as making that nexus between the ARPA funds and the reopening of a fire station, I think that's kind of a hard one because, once again, the sustainability of those funds. But to your question about perhaps, like, again, and this is going to be council's decision on how to allocate these funds, but like an emergency operations center, that wouldn't be a fire station per se, but that would be a city, a conference room within a city building. I think that might be something that we could allocate those types of funds, or if council wanted to allocate those types of funds towards an emergency operations center, that could be well used in outfitting such a center with communications devices and that type of infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you.
May I just add something? Well, two things. One, I think my understanding of the history of the funding of 74 was that it was in part opened with a non-ongoing source of revenue, which was one of the reasons that it was then closed, because the model might not have been sustainable when it was first opened. So to the GFOA point that Director Guillory raised and now Chief Wynkoop has mentioned, we do want to program the ARPA funds towards things that are, generally speaking, one-time in nature, or things that we want to spread out and expend on over a course of a number of years, but know is just limited term. A member of the public did mention, air purifiers for residents. So, I think there is a COVID connection there, but whether there's a COVID connection or not, if the city council decides to claim reimbursement for lost revenues with some of these ARPA funds, those are deposited into the general fund, then certainly air purifiers for qualifying households would be, an allowable expense. I'm not suggesting that that's the top priority necessarily, but there are a lot of ways to get there to address some of these other issues that are COVID related in the community.
Great. And I know I touched on a lot of things, so I'll let Councilmember Teague and the Mayor Pro Tem go. I just wanted to let either the mayor or the facilitator for right now know that there's folks in the comments section in the chat box writing, so maybe we can change the questions slide back to the public comment just so folks understand how to use public comment, just a procedure thing. But thank you all so much.
And having said that, I'm stepping back and knowing that we've got our facilitators from HDL, I am turning to the facilitators to help us incorporate the comments from the chat box into this discussion, or let me know if we will turn to our staff to have those people making comments in the chat box actually speak up as others have.
Dan, do you want to go into the chat feature and maybe ask those questions?
So we'll start with was asked. There was a question from Stephen Lacey, indicating that he's the owner of the Herb Shop and founder of Lacey Community Resources Foundation, where there's a focus on youth development. And he had put in a proposal for the Bank of America or Bank of Pinole last year in hopes of creating a safe space for youth and the opportunity for small business pop-up space. So was asking how funds will be used in regards to the youth of Pinole.
I'll take a crack at that. Brief response, which is it hasn't been determined how the funds are going to be used yet. That's the process we're going through right now. But I think we will all accept that as public input that youth funding is a worthwhile priority for consideration by the council.
Okay, so Sabrina Pacheco's wanted to find out where they could go to pick up flyers and help pass them out.
I think people can contact Director Guillory, who will be happy to provide flyers to whoever's interested in passing them out. Thanks anyone who's willing to do so, that would be great.
And somebody else commented, Sharon Sanders, I think she spoke though, but she wanted to be sure that some of the funds would be spent on the performing arts. And I think that's all of the questions that have come up in through the question tab.
This is City Clerk Yoko. It looks like we also have a hand raised, so if we're still facilitating public comment, we do have a hand that's currently raised.
Let's proceed as we know to do, so let's have that person speak up, please.
Okay, Rafael Menes.
Greetings. So, if I'm understanding correctly, we're now at the point of the meeting where we're discussing our sort of the brainstorming process discussion on how the spending should be used rather than questions about the guidelines. So if that's the case, then I have several comments I'd like to make about those topics. First off, I note that, and I'm going to be referring repeatedly through my comments here to the SLFRP FAQ, which is a PDF file provided by the Treasury. And I'll provide a link to that at the end of my comments. I note that item 8.2 in that commentary on page 37 states that fiscal recovery funds can be used to fund other post-employment benefits other than pensions. I know the city currently funds it as a pay-as-you-go process and doesn't have any funds set aside to handle unfunded liabilities, but I figure I should note that is flagged as one potential option. More broadly as to what I think should be done, I think that it is important to consider the immediate needs of our small businesses, especially considering the expiration of the broader eviction moratoriums at the federal, state, and county-wide levels. But some of that is more action for council to be taken with regards to ordinance rather than with regards to this in particular. I think looking at the various options that are available, one segment that's mentioned, 4.8 on page 21, talks about responding to crime and supporting public safety. And an option in there is to have community violence intervention programs above and beyond the police department to try and have other methods of intervention to reduce violence in the community before it gets to the level where the police department needs to intervene. So there's more discussion about that in regards to qualifying census tracts, which I don't believe Pinole has any qualifying census tracts, but I do think that looking into setting up a community violence intervention program at the city level in Pinole might be worthwhile, because I know we've had at least one murder in Pinole within the past year that could maybe have been prevented through interventions prior to the event, which was responded to by police. Let's see. It's also noted that funds can be used to provide eviction prevention support or counseling and legal aid to prevent eviction and homelessness. And I know that's more framed towards residential supports, but it might also apply to small businesses as well. That's 2.21 on page 12 of the frequently asked questions. I definitely think it would be worthwhile to look into the broadband support. I know that was stated as an infrastructure, and I know that's going to be more of a long-term and not immediate thing, because that was being evaluated as part of the overall economic development evaluation that was discussed. But I want to explicitly flag broadband as well as, wastewater, sewer as potentially being a worthwhile area for a city to invest in. Let's see. There's also, more broadly speaking, assistances that can be done, discussion about job training with regards to support in the community. It doesn't just need to be support to existing businesses. It can also explicitly flagged on item 2.5 on page 5 of the responses, allowed to have job training to address negative economic or public health impacts experienced due to a worker's occupation or level of training. So sort of as a broader community support for people who are unemployed or underemployed in our community, providing resources to support training and broader job market participation, which may also redound to support small businesses by providing a broader population of qualified workers that could apply to fill any job needs that they have. Because I imagine there is at least some business impacts that are affected by having jobs where they need hiring apart from support for fund costs, loans or grants to mitigate financial hardship, and so on, that are indicated under 2.5. For item 2.18, investment in improving outdoor spaces. It says that governments saw significantly increased use of parks during the pandemic that resulted in damage or increased maintenance needs. The interim final rules recognizes that decreases to a state or local government's ability to effectively administer services could constitute a negative economic impact of the pandemic. That's on page 11. And I definitely think it would be worthwhile to consider offsetting increased park maintenance expenses as part of the way that the economic relief funds are used, just because of the undoubted increased usage of parks over the duration of the pandemic. Let's see.
Okay, is that it, Mr. Menace?
There was one other thing. I guess this is sort of a broader topic, but it noted that there's recovery plan performance reports towards the end on pages 35 and 36 of the frequently asked questions, and that isn't strictly speaking required for local governments with fewer than 250,000 residents, so it wouldn't be required for the city of Pinole, but I suggest that it might be worthwhile once the city decides how it wants to use the funds to create a report along the lines suggested in the frequently asked questions and submit that report. And also that for obligation of funds, I'm trying to find the exact point on that, but I did note that you can obligate funds for longer term expenses by 2024. So if there's a longer term project that maybe isn't all the way completed by 2024, it goes on until 2026, it goes on longer, that funds could be allocated longer in that, if I'm understanding that correctly, though I may not be. And I think that's everything for now.
Thank you. Okay, so were there other public comments? Hands raised from the public, Steph?
Yes, Madam Mayor. David Ruport.
Okay, let's hear that.
Yes, 25 words or less. Pragmatically, how far do the ARPA funds go to resolving current COVID-19 emergencies and other priorities and needs of the city? Thank you.
Okay. I heard that as a question, but I'm not certain whether we have an answer to that. City Manager Marie, how did you hear that?
It didn't register as a question, registered as a suggestion, which is pragmatically address the most pressing and direct COVID-related issues.
Okay, we're getting a reinforcement. If I can ask members of the public, granted, there's an interest in making certain that what you want us to hear will be heard, but we have had a number of people identify particular interests or areas of need, and if we can have anything different or new, well, I think in the interest of time, I'd certainly welcome that. Repetition is not necessarily the best use of time, and I think we've captured, or staff has captured, as well as HDL has captured a lot of the comments. And then also for members of the public who are writing into the chat, I think those will also be taken into consideration as we proceed into the next workshop. Any other members of the public?
Yes, Sharon Sandor.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for taking my question really quick. As you all know, there's just a great need to tend to the mental, physical, emotional well-being of everyone, especially children, which is what my business caters to the most. And it extends, not just the city, but out the surrounding cities as well, which brings in revenue to the city of Pinole. And my question is, how is it determined which businesses will be helped? Is it only through this new public survey, or is there another facet to that? I mean, what other considerations are there besides the survey from the public?
If I may, I'm happy to take a crack at that. So it was mentioned before, and many of you know that the City Council took action toward the end of last calendar year to appropriate $100,000 for grants to small businesses.
Okay.
And we, that it was during a peculiar time of the year. I was right around the holidays, and there was going to be a break between council meetings, and staff was feeling some urgency to get that money into the hands of, as the community and council was, to get the hands into the businesses. And so we looked at best practices across other communities, did some consulted with the city council as well as the chamber about what the requirements would be for those small business grants. But we didn't take the time to circle back with the county to get an additional, the council to get an additional round of input from the council or the public before finalizing the criteria. We do, my sense is that we do have a little bit more time this go round. So in terms of what the program design will be, I think that's, you know, to the extent that members of the public and the council and our experts, HDL, we also have a separate consultant under contract who's going to be developing our economic development strategy. We're happy to get input from everybody about what they think the program design should be if the council wants to move forward with some form of small business assistance. So it'll, you know, take input from all those things, including the business survey. And then I think for that in particular, if the council decides at the November 6th workshop ultimately to appropriate some funding for that, that staff will go and come up with a proposed project design that then we'll bring back and present to the city council. We can do a lot of outreach similar to what we did last time, including the chamber, on what the parameters are. But I think we have the time for one more round of council consideration and public dialogue about what the parameters are. So that's, we're going to be, should the council ultimately decide to direct, to appropriate funds for some immediate small business assistance and direct staff to advance that, then I think staff will come back with a proposed project design that council and the community can provide some feedback on. Because we do want to, again, I think we felt a sense of urgency and really wanted to get the money out on the street in that grant program implemented the first time we did it. I think we have a little bit more time and can provide additional opportunities for engagement. I don't want any businesses to feel like they missed the opportunity to weigh in on who should be included, what the form of the assistance should be, and the like. It is going to be important for staff, and I'm grateful that we have the experts that we've hired on hand. You know, I think it's where the city can add value is by providing assistance where there are gaps. So there are all sorts of federal, state, and some county programs that provide assistance to households and businesses around COVID hardship. So I think we don't want to duplicate what some other agency is already doing. So we do need to do some research to inform our recommended approach to the city council about where the gaps in other forms of assistance lay. We don't want to be duplicating an existing form that the state is already providing. We want to provide something that additionally and particularly helps Pinole businesses in need. Sorry, Ms. Sandra, I hope I didn't put you to sleep with extensive explanation.
Thank you.
All right, Barry, are we on to other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think I would like to move on and get some of the thoughts from council members before we wrap up. So I think maybe we'll just we'll start with the Mayor Pro Tem. Any thoughts and ideas on projects or programs of interest to you?
No, thank you for your comments. Thank you for the questions. I just have a few comments. As the city manager stated, we're going to collect all the data, and I'm waiting to hear back from you, Barry, and your company to what the suggestions should be. Since you have so much experience, I look forward to listen to what you have to say. I also would like to point out a few items here that I heard today. One of them was related to the business assistants and business owners. I am myself a business owner. My business suffered because of COVID-19, and what I did receive something called the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. And what the Payroll Protection Program did is allocated federal government money that allowed my business to get money for paying my employees, and also as part of the money that I received, I was able to cover the rent and utilities. So one question I would like to ask those business owners who are here today, I would like to know, I heard Mr. Rain stating that unfortunately his loss of revenue due to rent was close to $200,000 and plus other things. I would like to know if those business owners receive some assistance from the federal government to the PPP. And on the other hand, I do understand that we received close to $4.2 million. $4.2 million seems a lot of money, but at the same time, it's a very limited amount of money, knowing everything that we need to do and everything that we heard today. Just to put in perspective, if we were, this year we identified about 100 small business owners that could get assistance from the city of Pinole. And if we were to help them $1,000 per month for the last 24 months, that would represent already $2.4 million that would be allocated to small businesses. And I heard Councilmember Murphy stating earlier that we can also help with filters. And we have about 5,000 houses here in Pinole, and if each of them were to get $250, that would be already close to $1.7 million. So if you were to put everything in perspective, we could spend 2.4 million businesses and 1.7 million on filters, and the money is already gone. What we need to do is we really need to hear and listen to what our expert says. I heard Mr. Martinez stating that we need to dedicate money for the roads, and the city manager stated back that we are working on it through the city capital asset and infrastructure plan. And I think the discussion to the council later on this year will be, should we put a tax on and ask the people to pay that gap of $40 million that we need, because $4 million is just gonna pay a little bit of it, but it's not gonna fix the problem. And finally, I wanna also tell you that I hear the issue that we have right now with people not being able to pay rent. And I heard Councilmember Murphy stating that we need to help our renters here in Pinole. I just want to put something in perspective. The last big crisis that we had in this country was back in 2008. That was referred to the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, the number of people in America, households that were behind their mortgage payment was 2 million families. 2 million families were behind the mortgage payment at the part of the Great Recession back in 2008. According to the report that I received from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from Washington, D.C. back in March of 2021, this is the most official report that we received. This number is not 2 million families being behind this year. This number is 5 times more. We are talking about 11 million families in the United States that are behind the mortgage payment. Just to put it in perspective, the crisis that we're facing right now with COVID-19 is 5 times greater than what we have seen in 2008. The reason why we are not yet seeing the consequences on our economy is because we have received a lot of money from the federal government. And one of them was through the delay of mortgage payment. And I believe President Biden stopped the delay of mortgage payment as of September 30 of 2021. So right now, everybody who is behind the mortgage payment would have to pay it. So helping our renters will help our renters, but would not help the people who have to pay the mortgage payment. So helping a group of community would not always help the lenders, because the lenders would ultimately lose their house and the renters would be kicked out of the house at the same time. And also would like to remind you that it's true that we have 30% of the people in Pinole that are renters, but out of 30% of people who are renters, you need to remember, and I have the numbers I was looking at it, out of those 30%, you need to know that 21% of those landlords who rented to those 30% of people are residents of the city of Pinole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think you've emphasized a number of things that, it may seem like the $4.6 million is a lot of money, but when you look at all the needs that were presented today by the public, it really is it's a small number in comparison to all the needs. And so I think, again, the city manager talked about this a couple of times, is we're looking at maybe doing some short-term, very pressing needs for the community, and then looking at some other things, infrastructure, other things that were raised today, more longer term. And there was also a comment earlier about the federal government is going to adopt legislation for some type of infrastructure stimulus package. You know, the question is it going to be $2 trillion or $3 trillion or $4 trillion? I mean, there is going to be something, and that can go for roads and bridges and sidewalks and other things that that were discussed today. So I think that again, it may seem like a lot of money, but it really isn't. So how about the mayor? Any thoughts or that you wanted to present?
I certainly have thoughts, but Councilmember Tabe and Councilmember Toms had their hands raised, so I'd like to have them speak up, and then I will speak up after the last person. Thank you.
How about Councilmember Tabe?
Before I get started, I just wanted to, re-emphasize those buckets, right? And one of those buckets does have us reimbursing the city to open up more buckets. So I'm hoping that the consultant will, or Barry, that you'll take this into consideration when we start to engage our community. And as we're pulling this together, what qualifies and what doesn't, because those buckets are going to be important as to how we pass this money through, basically, to the city, which is legally we can do. The other thing I wanted to mention real quickly, everybody talked about the postcard. Feedback I got, a lot of people couldn't read it. It was difficult to read. The survey print was very small, and it didn't, we heard about the Zoom. I'm wondering if we have to, the key points, the who, what's, and where's, and then a QR code maybe for the further detail. That way, if everybody wants to do more research, they can hit that QR code and go through it. So, a few things that were mentioned. This is borrowed money. Our federal government just raised the debt ceiling again. We're most likely going to be borrowing more money for the infrastructure plan. We are in some difficult times, as Mayor Pro Tem mentioned. So I want us to be cautious. One thing I'm suggesting is that we, in some way, as a council, cap that reimbursement number. I think the full $2 million is high, considering that there was a lot of work. I think we just need to, over the past couple of years, I just want to make sure that we cap that, because we do want this money going back to our community. They're going to need it. I personally feel we're in a bubble, and that bubble is either going to burst or there's going to be some mechanisms for the air to get let out of that bubble. When we talk about the financial bubble of 2008, we're in something similar, but it is a lot more difficult. So I just want the rest of my colleagues to take that into your calculation as we're making these asks. I'll just start off with the things that came to mind for me. Obviously, a lot of it was centered around infrastructure, just because of my background, but the Rule 21A comes to mind. We have an unfinished project, utility undergrounding. I think it's over by the school. There's these huge cables coming out of the ground. If there was a way for us to look at maybe partnering with PG&E to figure out how we can repair that and get that into a good standing. The other item I had was broadband. I know that some communities will typically package and aggregate all of the, everybody in Pinole and approach AT&T or Comcast or Sonic or other agencies to come up with a public-private partnership. And you're able to make small amounts of money on that partnership by aggregating everything together, by shortening bills. But what I'm wondering is if we could take that money and then try to find programs for low-income housing or people who are low-income bracket, so that they have access to broadband or to internet as well. So it's kind of a 1, 2, 3 step that I think if we had money to kind of package the entire city together, and then we can maybe get better rates instead of paying the $300, $400, whatever it is a month for cable TV. We could try to, pull that down by negotiating. So there might be some savings that we can then capture and put into helping people out getting internet. Also, the Pinole TV comes to mind as to how we loop them into that conversation so that we have a better picture on our screen when we're watching it. I don't think it comes through in HD, so some of the language, as the font gets smaller, you can't read it on the TV. I mean, I can't read it on the TV. I have pretty good eyesight, but my wife would probably disagree. So the other items I had was infrastructure. Obviously, I've been pushing recycled water for quite some time. We may not be able to build an entire recycled water plant with this money, but I'd like to see if there's a mechanism for us to maybe store, to have a smaller system. San Diego has something similar where they have a huge plant, but they have filling stations. So if you have a unpiped or way of storing water on your property, you can water the lawn. Water trucks come to mind for construction sites. Our parks could probably use a water truck. The street sweeping and what all goes into that. But if there was a way to start this process for us to start using recycled water, and at the same time looking at a larger plan coming out. The electrical charging stations we've been asking for since 2018. I think that also would probably lump into the infrastructure money as well. If possible, lighting and roads, we've heard about it. For small businesses, I've been looking at this gift card program. So I think the city manager, we talked about it a little bit a while back when we did the first round. But I'd like to see if we can start a gift card program. This program will help us help our businesses over time. So if we were to buy a bunch of gift cards for our businesses, we'd be able to, help our businesses with the transactions. And that kind of came through in the survey too, that, loss of customers and revenue. I think if we had incentives for people to go back to Pinole businesses, it might help generate more revenue. I started to think about building facade and some type of improvement program, like we had a grant program or loan program that would help our businesses enhance their buildings. Parking downtown, there's vacant lots that we can convert to parking that'll also help our small businesses within the downtown area. Business license forgiveness or reduction. There was also thought about maybe doing something like that. This is all stuff that I've been hearing in the community as well. And then low interest loans makes me feel like we keep circling, and I know Councilmember Salimi, you and I have been talking this for a while, is public banking. We brought this up as an agenda item before. If we're going to be issuing loans, I want to make sure we collect on them because we did this before with redevelopment and had wound up forgiving everything. If we're going to do grants, that's one thing. But if we're going to do loans and they're low interest loans, which I think businesses really need, we have to come up with a way of tracking that, making sure that we're supporting our businesses with the money, but at the same time that money is coming back to the city and then going right back out to our businesses so that there's some type of give and go there, and not just money that just goes out. So for public sector, the EOP plan was already mentioned. Let's see. Oh, the child care program was already brought up. Tiny Tots, I'd like to enhance that program if we can. I do know that that's a program that a lot of times either comes net zero or there's a very small amount of money that the city winds up kicking into that pot. So if there's a way to look at, the public safety element, the playhouse element, and lumping that into a program where we can enhance those, I'd like to see, whether or not that's something that we can start to do or even expand them. I know childcare is huge right now, and if we can expand that program, that would be great. And then I believe that was it. Those are the big ticket items I had for ARPA funds. Kind of shotgun that out there, but it's all recorded, so I guess everybody will get it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Councilmember. Lots of great ideas. I'll just comment on one of them. So the gift card program that you mentioned, that's something that we had also offered up. We have a staff person that did this previously when they worked for a city in Cupertino with Yifty. Yifty is based in Menlo Park, and they've done they do work nationally for their e-gift cards. And I know Benicia has done several rounds. Concord has done several rounds of gift card programs. Newark, others. We're about ready to kick one off in Lafayette. It's something that we've talked to Hercules about doing. So the promise is that to do an e-gift card program, and so you could come up with various denominations, but a resident could buy a $20 gift card. We would use $20 from ARPA funds, and we would also pay the pointer, the fee that EFT gets for doing the gift card with ARPA funds. And so, and they're only to be used for participating Pinole businesses. And so we can target whether you want to start with restaurants or whatever, or keep it broad. We're doing a pilot project, as I said, just going to kick off that with Lafayette, and then they'll give them a chance to test it and then tweak it later. But UTS, go ahead.
How well did those programs go?
Yeah, so the feedback we got on so they've done it multiple times, and so that they've a lot of positive comments where they continue to do it over and over. That people have liked using them. If you Google them and look at, they rate very high with customer service. And so we've talked to a number of the businesses in the city of Newark. They were very pleased with it. So they've done multiple rounds of the e-gift cards. And so again, it is as you mentioned, it has the ability to do a number of different things. So it gives your residents something. But then you're also you're helping your business, so it has a rippling effect where I think you can do a lot of positives, not only for your residents that use these, but also for your small businesses.
If I could, I saw one more thing in my notes about renter assistance and landlords. I think we need to come up with a way to connect so that renters are working with the landlords, and I don't know if that's through ordinance or if there's some type of requirement for some mediation. I mean, this is unprecedented what happened. I mean, but there has to be a way for us to talk to our landlords, make sure that they understand that there needs to be a conversation with renters. Some people have paid their rent and not had business, but I'm not sure if there is a way to craft language. And Eric, if we can maybe look at that, is maybe what we need to do is have our renters and landlords sit down and talk about how to move forward to recover costs. Because I understand that they're our property owner, but this is a rippling effect. And if there needs to be some type of assistance from the city, can we act as that third party to have that discussion? I know there's models out there, but I'm not sure how it would be tailored to our situation, because there is the commercial and there is the residential. And if it's like a 30-day, you have a chance to work this thing out type deal. I mean, if you could maybe look at it from that angle too, as we have that discussion further. Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, just one more quick comment. So on the business side, that's something we're actually working with San Leandro to kick off a small business grant program that would be targeted for rental assistance. And so as part of that, they would look at those businesses that have been damaged the most, that have the most rent that's outstanding. But anybody that would qualify, that would get the rental assistance, it would go directly to their landlord, so it doesn't go to the business and get washed out and some other things. It would go directly to the landlord. And then there's also part of it, we're still kind of just formulating the program, but it would have training for the businesses too, in terms of getting them above and beyond just paying their rent, but making sure they can have their business kind of move forward too. Councilmember Thomas.
Sure, thank you. I want to thank city staff, our consultants, and the public who have come out and spent their Saturday morning with us. Some of the takeaways that I'm seeing and hearing from community members have to do with the one-time funds versus ongoing programs. You know, I really think that we need to take a look at, you know, keep that in mind that this is one-time funds. And then also remember that if we're going to start up a new program, it would only be in effect for, you know, 1 or 2 years. And there is a substantial startup cost for starting a new program versus going to our list of you know, wants and needs that we already have. We have that in our capital facilities plan as well. That in mind, I do recognize the, you know, the urgency of assisting small businesses. You know, I think that we can assist with marketing. We do, I think, a 2-time-a-year mail out for recreation guides, and it would be very cost effective if we added, you know, the 4 pages, 1 additional sheet on marketing for our businesses. You're already paying for postal costs in that, and I think that would be a cost-effective way to help with some marketing because people keep that around for reference. The gift card program, I understand, has been very helpful and very popular. It not only, you know, it kind of reintroduces or introduces residents to a new business, which in turn, they're likely to return, you know, more than once. And then there was a comment regarding small business assistance based on need. I think that that is very important. I would hope that our consultants could help us with some guidelines so we don't have to recreate what the guidelines are. You know, are we going to ask for tax return information to determine that there was indeed a significant loss versus, you know, just you know, some other kind of application process, or having a stable grant that, you know, you ask for it, you get it. I would rather on this round really focus on what is the need. If we're going to look at the different buckets of restrictions for the funds, we have long, you know, for a long time, many years, had a list of improvements that we need to do to our sewer system. Our sewer lines have a lot of infiltration, and we have this is a perfect opportunity to really put a dent in that. You know, that way, you know, we could get a lot of environmental improvements. We could reduce the infiltration of stormwater into the sewer lines that don't need to be treated. So I think that we would see a cost savings elsewhere, you know, through some other line items if we invested in those kinds of improvements. Just looking over, if we did take a look at, you know, reimbursing the city for some of the expenses, then we could turn around and redeploy those funds into some things that might not fit the descriptions. I'm hearing a lot on, you know, the condition of Fernandez Park Field recently. I had a chance to go out to the, you know, the car show a couple weeks ago and saw that firsthand as far as, you know, for car show, and I could just imagine how it is for somebody that wants to use it for a program. So that is an example of something where if we reimbursed ourselves for funds, then we could redeploy those funds for something that doesn't necessarily fit the mold of what the ARPA funds were for. But the first expenditure being reimbursement does fit the mold. And then also sidewalks and road improvements would also fit that mold. But if we focus on something like sewer, we're also kind of narrowing what staff has to put together as well. You know, if we stretch that too thinly, staff is working on all of these, administering all of these various projects where if you put a lump into, say, two buckets, business, with the different elements there, and sewer. We have to remember that all of these programs and all of these expenditures take staff to do the design work, oversee contracts and things like that. And so I think our money would go further if we focus it. And so that's what I've gotten from members of the public in our discussion here. So I want to thank you, and I would also support, if we don't have it already, on the first page of our web page that we have links to the next meeting, links to the survey, and also I have also pulled up here, if folks are talking about rental assistance, there is quite an elaborate rental assistance program. If you type in housing is key or housing.ca.gov, there are resources there for renters, for landlords, and that sort of thing. And I would hope that we could focus people there rather than starting up a whole new program. If we can focus on where there are gaps and really implement that, I would hope that we would do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. I think we're down to the mayor. Mayor, would you like to go now?
I would, thank you. So I'm going to take a very broad approach to how to allot these funds that are one time. In the interest of addressing immediate need locally for those hardest hit families, and also for the businesses that some of whom have been represented through the comments, largely through the comments that we heard this morning. So there are some immediate or short-term kind of needs. And the approach that I'd like to take is to think about one-time funding used to address some of those short-term needs. Have some funds set aside, and we're not talking yet about amounts exactly, but just general areas for use of these. Certainly, I don't want to repeat, but within the guidelines of ARPA funds. Some midterm, which would be those kind of funds that the city could use in response to the assessments that are underway. By the time that we have those results, whether it's the end of the year or into next year, we will have a better idea about specific recommendations from the different consulting firms that we have hired to provide us that kind of guidance. And we also have the time to actually expend those funds. And then the third area would be using the funding that's one time to support and or fund the projects that have been deferred. And that gets us into infrastructure. And that gets us into the capital improvement plan if we have these projects that have been deferred because of a lack of funding. And in that, of course, we will talk about funds that are related to sewer infrastructure, as well as the beginning, perhaps the beginning of identifying how to expand access to broadband that helps in those areas that need them, among the families that need them. So something that I think we might all have in mind, as well as members of the public, but we don't necessarily, at least in my mind, identify readily or can identify readily, is what areas, geographic areas, and community areas of need are there in Pinole. In past efforts to identify that need, yes, we have heard about public comment. We've heard from people making public comments representing certain groups. Again, I speak to the need to have a better understanding of our community in an ongoing way, and the use of public funds, these ARPA funds, allow to have increased capacity among staff to use data sources that will provide us an overview and this is a one-time project over the next couple of years, really, to give us an inkling as to where the needs are with regard to income levels that may then substantiate what we believe are the most affected or impacted by COVID or have been, which leads us to identify perhaps also more in a more targeted manner where those renters who are facing the consequences of the moratoria find themselves. I mean, there are other groups that have been trying to identify who the most vulnerable, who the most needy are in their particular areas. That's at the county level, and we need to do so at the local, at our city level. And I don't believe we approach program planning, program design always with that in mind. I know that there's research done for particular projects that the city undertakes with use of consultants to try to identify how best to use funds from whatever source. And using these one-time monies ought not to be any more different. That we have an informed way of allocating funds that is based on the kind of information that represents our community as a whole. Going back to those 15 people who have responded to one survey, certainly that's an attempt at reaching out, but I think we're going to continually face the need to for ongoing engagement, ongoing communication. We know that. We have engaged a consultant to help us with that. Supplementing or perhaps complementing whatever results there will be from that consultant who will help us identify how better to engage and how better to communicate ought to be as well a means to have people provide ongoing direct input because they're interested in participating in civic opportunities. I'm going to stop a little bit and ask HDL, the report that you all produced in 2018 identified different categories of people, including those who participate most or least in civic kinds of activities. And unfortunately, like Pinole, other cities also face the challenge of engaging more people. And so that can't be what we settle on. There's got to be a way to form panels of people who are willing to provide input, but that are across our city. And I know there are firms that can help us do that. Turning back to our consultant now, HDL, the scope of your work with us, please let us know. Is it through the duration of how we are going to be spending these monies? Is it through 2026? What is the extent of your contract? What is the duration of that?
Well, it's helping put that plan together, and it could be extended, and
perhaps I shouldn't have asked that, right? It's like you would welcome that, I'm sure. Okay.
Yeah, so, there's a set amount, it's a not to exceed amount, and that was a guesstimate in terms of what we're going to need to get through this kind of very robust public engagement portion, and to the point where drafting a strategy. But it can be ongoing. It can be being still involved with it. But and again, the not to exceed number was truly just a guesstimate of what we thought it was going to be. But certainly willing to structure that to whatever works best for the city.
Well, and I think what I'm trying to describe here is what works out for the city is to have staff who are capable of using the tools that a consultant will have introduced or oriented them to, so that there's not an ongoing dependence on. And pardon that, I don't mean it to be insulting. I'm a consultant myself. But my approach is that we bring in and attend to the needs of our client, and then we let go. We have them take on whatever we've introduced them to. And I'm sure there's some of that in your philosophy of working with the city. But ARPA funds allow for rebuilding public sector capacity. And Up until now that we've known about ARPA funds being available, we have heard on council and as well in the public that the bandwidth of our staff is limited, and it will continue to be limited until we come up to a point that was pre-2008. And that's going to take us some effort. So in the interim, until that happens, maybe 10 years from now, use of these ARPA funds, as I see them, also provides us an opportunity to address not only food insecurity and housing insecurity for the immediate future, for those families that that with the help of our consultant, we can identify as needing that, but as well enhancing the capacity of our staff by putting into place the systems that can contribute to ongoing identification of where needs may be beyond the ARPA funds. So let me go back to the areas that were identified in the staff report and supplemental or additional documents. Revenue losses, immediate need as I see it are, how are we doing with equipping our own staff with PPE? This pandemic is going to continue at least to the beginning of, or it's going to maybe diminish a bit through the beginning of next year, 2022. In the meantime, that is an immediate need to make sure that we have staff equipped with whatever equipment is necessary to minimize exposure to COVID. The interest in public communication, whether it be for a public health emergency or otherwise, like the fire hazards and or risk that we might face. Can we not have ARPA funds, perhaps have more automation assistance that's automated so that the staff who may not be available to respond as quickly to members of the public could resort to an automated means of communicating with the public in the events of emergency. Certainly there's a county alert system, but could we not complement that with enhancing, for example, our own website, where most of the information that we have is available, whether that information is about services generally provided by the city and or when we refer to social services provided by the county, for example. Could we not have that on a handheld device, which means then an app that, again, a means to communicate with the public and to continually receive public input in a means that we don't have now, and maybe that would be a recommendation from the communications and engagement consultant. I would support something like that. Getting to, again, the addressing immediate needs, and that's related to food insecurity, housing insecurity, assistance to small businesses. I would ask my colleagues to not have us, pardon me, let me rephrase that, to have us consider using the nonprofit organizations that already have their administrative systems and program design and implementation means in place. For example, the San Pablo Business Development Center is an organization we could partner with to lever the funds that we will decide, if we decide to go this route, to allot to help small businesses in the forms of grants. They do that. They provide advice. They provide ambassadors to work with small businesses. We don't have to recreate that. The Contra Costa and Solano Food Bank, Meals on Wheels, existing organizations that have historically done very well in providing direct food service and outreach to people facing food insecurity or housebound seniors, for example. The Chamber of Commerce, our Bayfront Chamber of Commerce, who has helped us with outreach and education to the businesses, not only to their membership, but as well more broadly. There's a win-win with regard to increasing that organization as well as working with them in reaching out and in engaging with the business community. The farmers market, a wonderful, wonderful means of providing healthy food and improving the lives of those who use and shop there, not only from Pinole but elsewhere, and expanding their capability to enhance access to food and through use of existing programs. Someone mentioned CalFresh as an example, and helping, again, lever an existing program, an existing system through an existing means, because we know Pinole residents access the farmers market. Most recently, I heard at the mayor's conference the existence of a coalition that's addressing homelessness, and in a very proactive, preventive orientation. And their approach, when I say prevention orientation, is about providing such things as housing vouchers to those families who are on the tip of experiencing inability to pay their rents or their mortgages, mostly the rents. And the prevention aspect here is to prevent further homelessness. So those are some examples of organizations that exist with whom we can work with. Addressing the hardest hit families with some degree, some proportion of these funds for immediate relief, not necessarily directly, but through a means that already exists. Housing vouchers, complementing what they may already receive. The after-school programs that the city has right now, there is a fee for them. Could we not augment those by providing scholarships to families whose children haven't accessed them, but who we know are working families, and some of the eligibility criteria might go into single-parent families who haven't availed themselves of a program that exists. There's been mention of expanding child care programs. We have our own child care program here in the city that's faced probably a loss of personnel because they've been directly affected by COVID, economically as well as health-wise. And in the interest of trying to keep good working people working, that's a very direct place where we could assist by helping support the programming that Tiny Tots offers, for example. And I imagine when we are also looking for businesses that are in need of support, it's those child care providers within our city that may not have yet responded to the survey, but that represent a service to families, to working families here in Pinole. Let me see if there's anything else. Someone else mentioned the gift card program through Yifty, online gift card and promotion platform that works in multiple ways to enhance the relationship between the chamber, the small businesses, the city, and users or consumers of those businesses. So all around, it seems to be something that in its design can, over time, over the next 2 years perhaps, if we allot a certain portion of the funds to help small businesses in that way. We also get to view how effective a reach that is, and how useful it is, and how much the funds that we help supplement continue to circulate within our own local economy. So that would be something that I would support. And let me go back to where I started. I'm thinking then of immediate efforts, largely focused on food and housing security, interim or midterm programs to be designed based on the recommendations of our consultants when those assessments are in place. And then the third portion, or the third area, would be addressing or tapping into enhancing the infrastructure that we currently have that has been deferred. So that's what I can share with you right now. Didn't get into too much about program design. So I think, and I agree, that this really isn't going to go as far as we would like, whether it's the 2.3 or the 4.6 million. But we think, keeping in mind that we want to address immediate needs, keeping in mind that we want to lever our funds with organizations that are already doing the work that has been that has been addressing the kinds of family and business troubles that we've heard about that have been maximized or enhanced because of COVID. We can work with those organizations that now are also looking in local government to expand their reach and their effectiveness. And then the third area about doing something with infrastructure, knowing that we'll cross our fingers and continue to advocate that at a federal level and through the state, we will receive infrastructure money that is in a larger amount to also augment whatever we have started through with our ARPA funds. So thank you for listening, and that's what I have.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your comments and your thoughts. You know, I think we've heard from a lot of different public members today about some of the impacts that the pandemic and COVID have had on them, their businesses, some of their wants and needs and ideas. And so, you know, we've listened to those. We wrote those down. We have the business survey that's still open, so we're going to get more feedback from that. We'll be launching the community survey to get some more feedback from the community on kind of ranking their interests and things that are important to them in the community. And we'll probably tweak the draft that we have of that a little bit based on today. But then we've got the next workshop too, and so I think we're trying to go ahead and use a number of different vehicles to get feedback from the community. And so again, it may seem like a lot of money, ARPA funds, but it really isn't when you're looking at all the needs and things that you could do in the community. So I appreciate everybody's thoughts and ideas, both the public and council members. And so with that, I will turn it back to you, Mayor.
Oh, thank you. Well, I see Councilmember Tave's hand, and I am going to I'm going to support an idea that Councilmember you presented as well a long time ago, and that was the interest in job fairs, and that to me is an example of a program that to be designed and offered to Pinole residents that addresses the training needs to help people who may have had to rethink what they're doing given that their job losses. And so over a period of time, the next year and a half perhaps, some of those can be held, these job fairs that would involve, again, what we have available, for example, representation from the local trades, representation from organizations that are hiring, that kind of thing. And I believe our funds can be used for that. So somehow. So it goes along in interest of trying to augment the funds that may not be, there may not be a lot, but we're trying to expand as well across the community.
That's a great point, Ms. Mayor. If I may, I just went to the labor dinner that they had over at St. Mary's College, and that came up. Training is critical. We brought that up, I think, about almost 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So I think it's a great idea. And thank you for bringing that up again. If it's something that we can take into consideration, I'd love to. I don't believe Councilmember Murphy has spoken or given any input yet. Councilmember Murphy, I don't want to speak for you, but did you have anything on the ARPA funds as well?
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. I'm not sure if he had a chance to give any input in.
Well, I believe he went first.
Great, thanks.
And I think he will tell us otherwise, I'm sure.
Well, I just wasn't sure because it sounded like we were closing up, but okay, cool.
Thank you. So Mayor Pro Tem's got your hand. You have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Mayor. I just want to let you know that Mr. Rain wanted to provide a comment related to his experience as getting money from the city of Pinole and the challenges that he faced from being a franchisee. And he wanted to provide a quick response to my comment earlier. He has his hand raised.
Thank you. So we'll hear him, and as well, I believe our consultants wanted public input, remarks from members of the public about what their council members have said. So I think we're going to welcome that as well. Mr. Ring? Ms. Stone, is there a reason why?
Yes, I have unmuted Mr. Rains.
Thank you. Mr. Rain, please go ahead. We might have to come back to you.
If I may, I'm looking at the comments that Mr. Rain submitted in chat, and I think one of the comments, and I think is a sentiment that was shared in some of the other comments from the public. He mentioned specifically that franchises and businesses, local businesses that are parts of chains, were not eligible for the small business grants that the city of Pinole provided earlier. And the rationale behind that was that some chains provided support to their local outlets and franchisees, although I'm certain that it was very uneven. So we will certainly be looking into that matter. If council decides that it would like to provide some additional small business assistance using these ARPA funds, we'll definitely, as I mentioned, be looking at the program design and open to new ideas, including the possibility of including local outlets of chains or franchisees, because I do know that was a design element that eliminated the participation of prohibited the participation of certain businesses, and we're sensitive to the needs of franchisees like we are of independent local small businesses.
Can you hear me?
No, can. Yes. Please go ahead, Mr. Ring.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity again to speak. There are a couple of things I wanted to draw, the council's attention to, respective councilman, Mr. Vincent, mentioned that, they would like to know that there was some federal grants that came through and what we did and how come we have this higher debt. Just to give, I'm not going to share the full details about the numbers, but I will give you a high level perspective on things. Like our PPP grant, was somewhere around 53K. Let's say EIDL we only got like 28K. Our rent, the triple net portion of it is per month is roughly $4,400 or $4,300. 18 months of it, out of which the component of property tax that we paid back to the city is $3,188, which alone equates to $57,000, which is way above the PPP we got. Subject to we couldn't even get forgiveness for that amount alone because it was a 40-60 ratio. My point being that, the funds that we got, we were so grateful. It allowed us to come up till today. But now we are at a point where our business funds, our personal loans that we took from people are depleting. And Orange Theory is an international brand. It's a really good brand for Pinole to have. We don't see such big brands here, yet it is small family-owned business where we have invested our life savings in a hope for a success and a better, thing. We have been part of the community. We have donated to a lot of schools and teams when the times were good. Now the only thing motivates me as a businessman to wake up in the morning and see my employees get a paycheck in employment. But we are at a point that as investors, as business owners, we are looking at city for help. These are desperate times. We are at ground bottoms, and there are 3 businesses that folded in my plaza alone. I don't want to be the 4th one. I'm going to fight, for it. But we just need help. all, kind of councilmen and, women and panel. And I agree with Mr., I think Anthony, his name was, that if you do a loan program, please collect that. If grant is not possible, it's too much on the city. We're not asking for free money, but we are asking for help because the banks would not give us funding right now because our numbers are in negatives. The expenses that I just spoke about was just property tax, no salaries. We had people reached out to us during pandemic that they needed fitness, and we invested for outdoor fitness. That was from our pocket. We have not seen profits yet, but still we are satisfied that we're able to provide service to the community. So that's my short explanation about the scenarios that we are facing right now as business owners. And I hope, the city can think and help us, sooner than later, because I don't know how much time we have, to be very honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stone, help us scan for any hands raised for members of the public.
Yes, Rafael Menace.
Mr. Menace, go ahead.
All right, so first off, before I move on to respond to some of the comments that council members have made, I said that end of my prior comments that I state the link to the file I was referring to, and I forgot to do that. So I found the link. I put it in chat, but to say it here, it's https://home.treasury.gov/system/files/136/SLFRPFAQ.pdf. And you can find that through looking on the Treasury website as well, but I want to mention the direct link as well, as that could go over verbal comments. I know now to move on to responses to council member comments. I know that several council members mentioned that it's important not to entail ongoing obligations due to the one-time nature of the funds and not to have duplication of roles between what the city is doing and what the county is doing, or what various nonprofit organizations in the community can do. And I agree with those things are important. But at the same time, I think that it's worth at least considering how the city could work on encouraging violence intervention before it gets to the level that the police department needs to intervene. I don't know whether that would be new employees or partnering with nonprofit groups or having city employees who are engaged in other tasks also intervene where they see situations that might escalate. I know that there are other departments in the city that do code enforcement, for example. But I definitely think that one of the impacts of the pandemic has been increased stress levels in the community and to some extent increased levels of violence as well. And the city should do things to mitigate that. More broadly, I agree that stormwater should definitely be a focus, just due both to the, as I said earlier, I don't want to repeat myself, but due to the age of the system, as has already been noted, and due to the fact that we're already evaluating the needs for it. So it's likely that we'll have information on that sooner and perhaps some items. But I think it's important to strike a balance between the stuff that we plan for and maybe have sort of longer term things and not spending it, and also having some funds set aside for stuff that's more immediate and has a direct impact on people's lives now. So it's not all, okay, we're going to spend these funds sometime in 2023 or 2024 or 2025 when there's a plan finished and we have, this sense of where everything needs to go. Like, some of the funds should be spent that way because it'll be better if we have a better sense of where funds need to be spent and how they can be spent the most effectively. But at the same time, there are people, many of whom who have spoken today, who are having issues now. And if they have to wait until 2022 or 2023 or 2024 to start having their issues addressed, that might be too late. So I think there should be a balance in how funds are allocated, so it's not all to one category or all to the other, but there's sort of a balance between more immediate short-term assistance and longer-term, more planned, larger projects. Thank you.
And we have Yvette Rico.
Hi again. I agree with some of what Raphael just said. One thing I want to remind the City Council of, these are rescue funds. And a rescue means that you're doing something to deal with a dangerous or distressing situation. We are trying to rescue certain aspects of our community that are most imminently in danger because of the pandemic. What they have suffered, what they can suffer, what they cannot do for themselves. So the social and human toll should be priority number one. The business community is a priority. Infrastructure is a priority, but it can wait. And I do not disagree, do not agree that our sewer system needs to be a priority at this time. We have to spend the immediate attention, and most important impact of this money needs to go to those people and those communities, businesses that have been acutely hurt by the pandemic. That means social programs, that may mean additional staff, but we cannot turn this money into a bonus that we have received that we can use for anything that anybody wants. We are having to deal with a pandemic that may not end, as you have said, for another year or two. How is it affecting people's lives? How can we help to impact their lives? How can we rescue them with the American Rescue Plan? And I don't see that being done with long-term goals. We must look for short-term, immediate, positive impacts that we can use this money for, not what we can think about doing in 2024, 25, 26, when things already are bad enough in 2021 and into 2022. So please consider that all these are wonderful ideas and wonderful ways to partner with other organizations, but we need to think about us, the city of Pinole, and how can we help those who live here, work here, and own businesses here? How do we help them now? This is a rescue plan that we must implement to serve the people of the city immediately as best as we can. Thank you.
There are no more public comments.
Thank you. Okay. So, HDL, Mr. Foster and Ms. Meyer, where do you want us to go at this point? What would be most helpful given the work that you have before you between now and the next workshop?
You know, I think we've got certainly a lot of feedback and thoughts and ideas that were presented both by the public and by the council today. So I think we appreciate that, and so we've got that, and then again we're going to continue on with the business survey is still open, and then we will go ahead and kick off the community survey, and then make plans for the next workshop. So I think we've accomplished what we wanted to do today, was hear from people and from the public, but also hear from the council members on your first thoughts and ideas. And so I think we appreciate that. So I'll turn back to you to wrap this up. But again, I appreciate everybody spending the time on a Saturday and sharing their thoughts and ideas.
Thank you. I'm going to see if there is anything else from the chat. If you would please help me, Mr. Foster and Ms. Meyer. If there's anything else in the chat that we haven't expressed, so if folks aren't reading what's there, the public hears as well. Anything that hasn't been heard, that has been typed in. Short of the actual links that some people offered.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that hasn't been raised or discussed. Not seeing anything in the chat or anything in the questions.
Okay, thank you. And just, and as a matter of clarification, any work with other organizations that already have in place programming, this is getting to more the granular level, is in the interest of indeed helping our own residents and our own businesses. There's a difference between establishing new programs and accessing those that are already in place. But in accessing those that are already in place through the organizations that have already worked with people in need pre-COVID and continue seeing their role even enhanced as a consequence of COVID, it's taking advantage of their expertise with agreements in place that would have to be created so that the services are offered to our residents and to our businesses. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified. It's not about giving up the funding that is allotted to Pinole to be used throughout the region, for example, if an organization works regionally, but working with their systems to try to minimize the expenses that would be incurred in staff time as well as in real time and real money that would have to be used by Pinole. And so again, it's an example of leveraging funds along with those organizations that have the focus on.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Mayor. There's a lot of established, very well connected, with great track records, nonprofits that already have been serving the community for a number of years. And so I think that to look at meeting a lot of the intent of ARPA and recovery and assistance and everything else, taking advantage of those existing nonprofits and organizations is certainly it's a great way to go ahead and do it where you're not having to start something out brand new. So I think that that's being done in a lot of other communities. And so I think that that certainly makes a lot of sense. We still would look for them to provide feedback back in terms of who they're serving, the impact and everything else, because that's going to have to then go ultimately into the reporting back to Treasury for ARPA. And so, but again, I think that's, you bring up some great points that having those established organizations and nonprofits and utilizing their expertise certainly makes a lot of sense.
Another point, and this is speaking to something that Councilmember Murphy mentioned in his comments, and that was the interest in collaborating and further establishing some way of working with our neighboring cities, again, to augment the reach and impact and use of the ARPA funds. I would like things may have changed now because maybe 4 or 5 months ago, in the mayor's supervised groups monthly meeting that includes mayors from Hercules, El Cerrito, San Pablo, Richmond, and Pinole, I asked, knowing that ARPA funds were coming down the pipe, their interest at that time of working together with us as a city to help augment the reach and the impact of the funds. And there were no takers. One even apologized for not, jumping on that notion because they are in different circumstances than we have been, fortunately, given the work of prior councils to allow us to have a balanced budget even through COVID. And so perhaps the willingness that other cities have, given their entire councils, thinking through what it means to allocate funds over a period of time that are one time. Maybe now there are more informed notions about how those could be used, and perhaps there are members of those councils that have suggested to work with neighboring cities, and certainly I think we would want to do that. But at least at that point, 4 or 5 months ago, that wasn't expressed, and again, maybe that has changed now. So things do develop differently as we know more about the funds, and as well as we hear more from the public in our respective cities. Well, we come to 1:05, and unless there are any other comments from council members, I welcome you to help us with any summary or other comments, and otherwise we will adjourn this meeting to the next meeting of the council. Any further statements from you? Okay, I see no raised hands.
So if I may, we'll go ahead and promote the next workshop as thoroughly as possible. It sounds like we'll go ahead and, if it seems feasible, send another postcard with hopefully making it as clear as possible how people can engage. City staff will be working with HDL to summarize the input we've received today and through the other various means. That'll be presented at the next workshop. I think HDL and city staff will present some recommendations for council's consideration based on that input and what seems to be working well in other communities for your consideration at the next workshop. The resident survey, I think we'll try and provide folks with the option to provide input on various buckets, including those that have seemed to resonate during today's discussion. So we'll be back in a month's time at our next workshop with a summary of all the input that we've received, as well as some preliminary staff recommendations for the appropriation of the funds. Thanks everybody thanks HDL, thanks staff, and certainly City Council and all the members of the community for your participation on a Saturday, and wish you a nice remainder of the weekend. Go out and enjoy some nice sunny weather.
Thank you, City Manager Murray, and our staff as well. And I will adjourn this meeting to the regular City Council meeting of October 19th in remembrance of Amber Schultz. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.